Okay, we should be live here. So, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to our Neuralink show and tell pre-show. So, we're going to go over a little bit about brain-computer interfacing and what we expect Neuralink might cover in this event, because we know a lot of people listening are interested in Neuralink and their technology, and then also into neural interfaces more broadly. So yeah, we're gonna go around, and I'd like to have everyone introduce themselves first. And Colin, just keep me updated to make sure that everything on the stream is going well.
Yep,
But yeah, so Colin and I will let Colin do his own introduction. But Colin and I are the BCI Guys, who you may know if you're subscribed to our channel and watching us, but we create educational content around neurotechnology, and yeah, is everything? Sorry, I'm just paying attention to the stream, making sure everything's good. I think we're good though.
sounds a little low, Harrison.
For me,
We need to pull it up a little bit. Yeah, how's my sound, guys? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
yeah,
Let's see what.
that's. I will try pulling this a little bit closer to myself too, and maybe that will fix it. We're working in real time here, guys. All right.
It was mostly you. It was mostly you.
Okay. Yeah, my mic's on a different thing, so that's probably why. But yeah, so we create educational, entertaining content around neurotechnology and brain-computer interfacing. So if you're interested in this outside of Neuralink, we encourage you to check out our other content. But yeah, we'll be providing a broad industry perspective on what Neuralink is doing to give an accurate and honest opinion of what we're seeing. Colin, anything to add onto that?
No, yeah, we make brain computer interfacing content. That's why we're the BCI guys, believe it or not.
And then we've got our video editor, Mike, on the bottom, who you don't usually get to see, but he brings a lot of personality to the videos. Anything you want to say?
It's fun.
It's fun.
Good time.
Yeah.
Good.
Mike's the third BCI guy. He's the guy behind the camera. You might have seen him from the bloopers for Neurotech EDU, which were he was where he starred as what was it? Colin Canning or something like that.
Yeah, one of those.
Right.
Could be reprising, could be a recurring role. I don't know.
Harrison, it's just your audio that's low. If you could just pull yourself up just a little bit more.
Still? Okay.
Yep.
There's not a ton I can do, but I will do my best. All right, and Sharina, our special guest, person who is not a regular on our team, but a good friend of mine, give us a little bit of background on you and maybe what your Steal This Brain idea initiative is.
Thanks. I have done a PhD working in brain rhythms and neural circuits at the University of Michigan. And what am I doing now? The answer is a lot of things in the startup world at the same time. I'm not allowed to talk about my current job, but you can look me up if you would like to. But I have started a YouTube channel called Steal This Brain Idea, where I talk about brain ideas, as well as various things in the nervous system and how it solves problems. And that is a YouTube channel.
Very cool. Yeah, what's your YouTube channel? We'll plug it here.
It is Steal This Brain Idea.
All right, I will send a link to that in the chat.
Very cool. All right, well, let's get into it. So we're just going to briefly chat about what Neuralink is. This is pretty rough. We just kind of want to talk about what our expectations are, go through some topics. There's been hype, there's been criticism, so we want to work through that. And also we want to hear from you what your questions are, and try to answer them. So that's primarily what we're here for. So Colin will be monitoring the chat. I will try to glance over as I can. Is my audio better now, Colin? It's good. Okay, great. So I will try to keep an eye on those as well, but please ask your questions. That's mainly what we want this to be about. But yeah, so I am gonna jump over to.
Should we quickly address what this whole thing's about, real quick? Neuralink event.
Yeah.
Exciting. We're excited to see whatever they decide to show us, whatever's public. I guess last year they started pretty late, so we're sort of banking on having some extra time, some spillover time here as they prepared their live stream. In fact, I'll pull that up on my computer as well, just so that I have
that is a good
so that we
idea.
know when they actually start.
That is a good idea. But yes, so this is the third event that Neuralink has done. I believe their first one was in 2019. Is that right, Sharina? Do you know?
I don't remember.
And they did one. I think last year as well. We should have looked at that ahead of time. All right. Let me go ahead and jump over to the slide deck here. So that should be this one. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, it seems that their first show, Elon Musk talked about work in pigs, and then in a future year, he talked about them in monkeys. So it's exciting to see how this progresses over time, which animals are used, which kinds of questions are answered, which kinds of questions are asked, and how this technology comes to develop.
Yeah, definitely. And so, like you said, we've seen their neural interface, which they call the link, in a pig, where it just was basically recording data and streaming that wirelessly. So that was good to see that their device is capable of that, although there are plenty of devices that can do that. And then they also, as we'll show in a second, showed a monkey playing Pong, just using his thoughts. And again, this is not something that's new to the neurotech industry. There are other companies that have done it, but the pace at which they got there is exciting. So we will go through and talk about that. But so I've got the first slide up here next to me. I don't think you guys on the Zoom can see it, but if you can just follow along. So what is Neuralink? So Neuralink is a brain-computer interface company, which means that they are they're building an interface to collect signals from the electrical potentials that are in your brain from your neurons, and decoding that into some sort of action, usually. So if you can imagine one potential application that other interfaces have been used for is driving a cursor around on a screen and then selecting letters, for example, to type on a keyboard just by thought. There are many, many examples. There are examples where people have used prosthetics, but basically brain-computer interfacing is connecting a brain to a computer to have some sort of thought-directed activity. It's a little bit more broad than that, but for our purposes now, that's where we'll leave that. It was founded in 2016 by Max Hodak, Elon Musk, Philip Sabes, and Vanessa Tolosa. Yeah. And there were others. I believe there were 8 co-founders in the beginning. Only 2 of them remain. Max Hodak started a company called Science Corporation, and they actually just announced recently a retina implant to act as a visual prosthetic, so to help people who are having difficulty seeing because of an issue with their retina. And they've raised a very significant amount of money to date. They've raised $373 million. And so I think out of the specifically brain-computer interface companies, that's the most that's been raised. But having Elon Musk's name tacked onto that, for better or for worse, I think it brings a lot of eyeballs onto it for sure. And, that certainly helps with funding. So onto the second slide here. The first introduction that the world really got to Neuralink publicly was in this Wait But Why article by Tim Urban, which is a really wonderful blog that I recommend you go check out. And it's explained quite simply what the purpose of a brain-computer interface would be and why the company, he says Elon Musk a lot, but really I'm going to speak to Neuralink as a broader company because it's more than just one person, certainly. And the goals that they have in building this device. And one thing that Elon had said repeatedly as a goal for why he was interested is in connecting minds with AI to, I guess, theoretically make people smarter so that they can, work with AI and not be beaten by AI. That I think the industry our industry, the neurotech industry, was like, yeah, okay, that's pretty far out right now. But that was a lot of people's first introduction to what this technology is, and what Neuralink will likely be used for in the beginning, and then what other neural interfaces to date have been used for is to act as an assistive device. So you can think of for people with paralysis that don't have the ability to use maybe even to speak or to move themselves around, to use a computer. There are other brain-computer interfaces that have shown that it's possible to drive a wheelchair, control a prosthetic, like I was saying, type, and that can be life-changing. There are also applications that they have looked into and that other companies have worked on regarding visual or auditory implants. So there are lots of things that are out there. And by the way, guys, please jump in as I'm going through if you have anything that you want to say. But yeah, so we talked about what so brain-computer interface is effectively doing three things. So it's collecting the signals. There are several ways that you can do that, but usually you're collecting electrical potentials from the brain. And so you can do that from either outside the skull, which is non-invasive, sitting on top of the brain, which is semi-invasive, or actually penetrating into brain tissue, which is considered invasive. There's a lot more nuance to that, but for now, that's kind of what we'll stick to. And so Neuralink is developing an invasive brain-computer interface where there are little electrodes that are actually implanted into tissue of the top part of the brain, which is called the cortex, which is a lot of our higher level processing that you would think of like what it's like to be human, to move around, your senses, that sort of a thing. And yeah, so we collect the signals, you encode the signals, so you do some fancy machine learning, and then you deploy that for some sort of application like we've been talking about. So in terms of those applications, did you have something to say, Shrina?
Oh yes, I do have something to say, which is there's a question of why do we need all of these neurons in the first place? Because there is a bunch of stuff that's happening beneath the cortex that has to do with how emotions are processed and how sensory processing happens also, rather than long-term memories and possibly higher order things. So, well, why is this measurement all from the cortex? That's partly because it sometimes takes less invasiveness in order to get down into it. So then there's less scarring if you can get the information from the cortex. But then there is the matter of, okay, can this information be enough information to get what we need to from it? And I think that in some cases, such as movement control and sensory control, it can be extremely helpful. Though, of course, there are millions of neurons in the brain, and we can only measure from thousands of them at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are technologies, of course, from my work with BlackRock, I know a little bit more about what they are working on, but they just announced something called the Neuralace, which they say can have upwards of 10,000 electrodes. Again, this is placed on top of the cortex. I know Paradromics has a chip that also has a significant amount of electrodes. I think they were also talking somewhere around 10,000, but it's a different structure. And so there are lots of different ways that we can record data either from the surface of the cortex, like you were talking about, or even going deeper. You can see in this diagram that there are some examples of what these technologies are. And so this area where you see penetrating microelectrodes, this is based on BlackRock's Utah array, but this is a similar concept to what Neuralink is working on here in terms of penetrating brain tissue. But there are lots of applications that they've been used for, so you can use this for diagnostic purposes. You can use it for neurofeedback, which can help people learn to change their own brain activity. So you could, for example, it could teach you like breathing techniques. So you could, when you relax, you make a balloon go up or whatever, and you learn that over time. It can help people with ADHD as well, using neurofeedback. Computer control, like I said, some emotional detection, although that's a little bit wonky. And then theoretically cognitive enhancement. We know that stimulation of brain areas can help with things like pain reduction, helping with anxiety and other mental health disorders, but it also, depending on where you stimulate, can produce elevated mood. So that's interesting as well. And then, of course, neural intervention helping to overcome certain deficiencies that have happened in the brain.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to quickly interject here,
Yeah.
and just say, thanks for all the engagement in the chat. If you have any specific questions you want us to go over or answer, add them in the Q&A area. So if you click live chat or top chat or whatever, and then click questions, and just ask them in that area, that'd be perfect, just so we can keep things organized. I also wanted to quickly thank everybody that's here. Thank you guys so much for showing up and for supporting our channel. We actually recently just were accepted to YouTube's partner program. which is huge for us. We've worked really hard since the beginning of COVID to make these videos, and it's great to sort of see some more advanced metrics on where people are coming from and all that stuff, as well as getting ads enabled and stuff. So that's been awesome. It's been great. We also are excited to announce that we have super chats and stickers and stuff unlocked in the chat. So if you want to support us at all, feel free to do so with super chats or whatever in the chat. We don't live stream much, obviously, but any little bit helps. We also have a Patreon. If you go to bciguys.com/support, you can check out our Patreon page, as well as all of our merch and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to do a quick plug there, and we'll head back here into the BCI discussion.
Colin's good at the business stuff. Thank you for remembering to do that. I'm going to skip through the rest of these slides pretty quickly because I really want to get to, now that we're coming up on time, some of the things that we expect to see. So I'm just going to fly through these. But this is another type of brain interface where it sits on top of the brain, called electrocorticography. This, so the microelectrode array, specifically we're looking at the Utah array here, has been, by BlackRock Neurotech, has been the gold standard for what implantable brain-computer interfaces can do since about 2004. So it's all these little electrodes that go into the tissue and are recording from that. So Neuralink has some ways that they want to build something similar to this, but we'll talk about. But one thing that they want to do is put it on threads. So each electrode is on its own flexible thread, which they say could help with decreasing scar tissue. That remains to be seen, but that's kind of the idea, which I think is an interesting one. And so here's what it actually looks like going in. I believe this was gelatin, but these are those threads that I was talking about. And then this link is going to sit within your skull. So a cool thing about that is that you wouldn't see anything theoretically. Again, we haven't really seen papers come out with this, so there's not a lot that we can say about this, but theoretically you wouldn't be able to see that. And then now getting into this event here, and I'm going to pull away from the slide deck in a second, but so this tweet came up that they put out on the 24th, which was, so it was like these letters that were typing across the screen slowly. People have been speculating about what that means. As far as we know, they're not in clinical trials yet, and I did a lot of skimming for clinical trials that they may be involved in on clinicaltrials.gov, and I haven't seen anything. But this was something that they originally said they were going to do in 2020, then 2022, and so we don't really know where that has ended up. And there was some controversy with the way that they were doing animal testing, which may have delayed this as well. But there's some speculation that this could be some sort of typing method. And so that remains to be seen, but this is something to look out for. Just keep in mind, if this is being typed by a monkey, there's probably something more going on, because monkeys don't have understanding of complex language. So
right.
If this is seemingly being typed by a monkey, then I would expect that it's a lot more simplistic than we're actually seeing, just because you're not going to be decoding a word from that monkey. It may be selecting different sounds or selecting a word from a word bank. The monkey wouldn't understand what they're doing. So that's just something to note. But
they might.
Yes,
who knows?
go ahead.
I guess we don't know, right?
Maybe with this AI connected to their brain, right?
Yeah, they can learn sign language. And so if they can learn sign language, then what prevents them from learning to control things that say words?
It's the Coco question, right? Like, are they signing because they know they're going to get food? Is it conditioning, or is it actual understanding of the subjects coming out that they're trying to vocalize or whatever?
Yeah, it's
well,
interesting.
Monkeys have done things like sign about their dreams and things like that previously in psychology research. So it is kind of interesting to think what is on a monkey's mind. Is this infinite monkeys typing on infinite keyboards, which eventually asked us to please join us for the show and tell.
All right, I stand corrected on that. So sorry, Colin, did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, just finish up, because we got a lot of questions here I want to get through.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. All right, I will wrap it then here. So this was the demo that they showed with their monkey, who they named Pager. and playing Pong using their neural interface. Again, there wasn't a paper about it, so we don't really know how much depth this went into, but this is Pager. And then other things that have been done in the, oops, I gotta skip past this, in the neural interface space. So this is using BlackRock's arrays. Multiple Utah arrays are allowing this guy Buzz to control prosthetic arms, cut a piece of bread, feed himself that bread. So you can see in humans already there's a lot of complex functions that you can do. This is sensory feedback going into this person, Nathan Copeland's brain. So he's actually able to feel through those fingers. Another example of someone named Jan using a prosthetic arm very impressively. Typing application, imagine moving that cursor around on the screen. There's also been whole word decoding where you think of a word and that's been decoded. We can talk about all this in more depth, but this is the Neuralink show right now, so we'll keep it brief. And there are other companies like Synchron that's also developing a brain-computer interface, kind of with a different, a little bit of a different direction. But there are lots of people working in this space from different angles, so that's important to note. All right, I'm going to stop screen sharing so that we can get into people's questions and then
We
talk
have a lot.
about the controversy. Yeah, I didn't realize we were so close to time here, so hopefully they will be late.
Oh,
And
I'm sure
we will
They
let all
usually
of
are.
you know, by the way, everyone watching. Colin, you are monitoring that, right? So we can let
Yep.
people know when that starts. But
When
yeah,
it starts,
go
yeah.
ahead, start giving us questions, and then we'll talk about what we think we'll see.
So we have quite a bit here. We have 7 of them here. We'll start from the bottom up because this is my favorite question. Would you guys ever get a Neuralink to control an exoskeleton like Dr. Octavius? One of my life goals is to become Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man. I want to be a supervillain with robotic arms. I would love that. So yes, personally, yes. If I could do it non-invasively, that's ideal. But you know, if a Neuralink's required for me to have my robot arms, you know, I might just have to roll those dice. We have a question specifically.
Hey! I want to answer that too.
Yeah, okay, go for it. Go for it.
I
Could
want
you
to
do
answer
it?
I don't
that
want
too.
you would have all the fun. It's so funny whenever Colin and I like go to different neurotech companies or talk to different researchers. This is always his thing, and I'm always like a little bit embarrassed, but it's a funny question too, and I like that
It's a good
become this
joke. It's a good
ongoing
meme.
theme. No, I love it. I absolutely
yeah.
love it. But I'm like, oh god. So this is a good venue. I love that. But yeah. So I mean, I'm just going to use, instead of saying Neuralink's thing specifically, just a implantable brain-computer interface in general, because again, like, we just don't know what the safety record or capability is of this, and there are other technologies that you know are out there as well that are being developed. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely, I think that's an interesting thing, right, to have another limb, and like, is that possible? Could the brain handle adding another extremity in, you know, an adult? So that would be interesting. But yeah, I think especially for like just multitasking in productivity would be really cool, and that would be in the future a little bit, maybe projecting images into the brain. I think that would be wild, like a super immersive experience. But obviously right now, like, it's really important for people who are like paralyzed, and like this is a very good option.
Which is,
for them.
it's good that that's
But
the focus. For
it's
the
good that
field
that's
right
the
now.
focus, but I
Yeah.
would definitely get a brain implant in the future if it could create a really immersive experience for me. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
Shannon.
What about you, Mike? Or
Yeah,
Sharina
yeah.
and Mike? Yeah. What
Let's
about you
hear from
guys?
both of you.
Yeah, I think
my
from
thought is that-
or,
Okay,
Sharina
go
first. Go.
Okay, there is that question of how much is reading from the brain reading the mind. And I think that to a lot of extents, you can read better from what the brain intends to do by actually reading from somewhere in the periphery. So, for example, reading signals from a calf or some other muscle in the body, where it may control something else by moving something in a particular muscle in a particular way. So I don't want a hole drilled in my head. But then again, anything that has gone through clinical trials, it has been, well, it is a substantial case where their safety and efficacy is evaluated. And these kinds of things, they're not taken lightly by the medical technology community.
Right.
So in terms of things like, say, making a hologram sort of system where I can have multiple arms in the metaverse, that would be fantastic if it could be measured from, say, muscles in my back instead with an EMG rather than a brain interface. though there are muscles in the head that are not necessarily the brain that could also be used to control that. Say, if I wink a certain way, that a certain extremity just gets very excited and then there's confetti. So where does the neural interface end? I think that it ends in a way at the end of the universe.
What about you, Mike? Would you get an implant for an exoskeleton?
Oh, definitely. Because I feel like by the time it gets to us, there would
Yeah.
be so many wrinkles that have been ironed out. And it's just kind of like, yeah, sure. I mean,
Mike and I are going to be climbing buildings together in New York City with our robotic arms. And Harrison's going to have to develop spider powers to take us down.
and that'll be a video.
There we go.
There we go. Next BCI Guys video. Okay, question specifically for Sharina. Do you think it's worth getting a PhD in BCIs? And if so, do you think having a skill to develop hardware is mandatory for working with brain-computer interfaces?
I think it depends on what you want to do with it. If you do indeed want to build things in brain computer interfaces, then often what they want is some sort of background in data science and or electrical engineering. And so a person, well, they can study all kinds of things with cells and molecules without ever actually getting to the point where they are very marketable for brain machine interface companies. I think that a person does not necessarily need a PhD to do that, but the level of detail orientation when it comes to designing studies in the first place and creating things and thinking through the intellectual property is a certain orientation towards the education system that a person needs to be mindful of regardless of where they want to be in this field. So that's not necessarily needed. Well, I don't think that my PhD has specifically made me fantastic for brain machine interfaces, except that it was largely about decoding local field potentials and signals from neurons. And so this focus on electrophysiology and thinking through this on multiple levels, from the level of cells to the level of tissues to the level of awake behavior, it was quite useful.
So having that ability to sort of dig deep into the topics and really get into the nitty gritty is almost the most beneficial part, you'd say, for the PhD part of that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, there's also this general sense of going from just consuming knowledge to being a creator of knowledge. That is considered what a PhD does. I think also that people must think about a PhD not as a goal, as an end in itself, but as preparation for a job. And
Gotcha.
if a person can think through it in this way, get out with a job, get out with specific knowledge and access to certain people and access to specific machines that will allow you to explore this area, then will do substantially better than a person who just hopes that their classes will take care of them entirely.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's interesting. I think too. So I don't have a PhD, to be clear. I just got out of undergrad last spring. But I think that the question of should I get a PhD? What should I study in? This is not a satisfying answer, but it's very, very personal to each person and in terms of what impact you want to have. We made a video on this called Next Steps in Neurotech to try to help people make that first step. So you can look for that if you're having this question, but there are so many different ways you can contribute to neurotechnology. So if you want to be like doing research, working with neural interfaces, implanting those, or getting like data from an implantable neural interface and working with that, you're going to need to go the higher education route to do that. But there are other ways that you can be helpful. Like, I mean, we're doing science communications, right? And you can be well educated in this space and give good information out to people without needing a PhD necessarily. And neurotech is super multidisciplinary, so you can approach it from many, many different angles.
Yeah, that's a good segue actually into this next question, which is, what would you consider the most promising non-invasive BCI at the moment? So I worked for a company called OpenBCI. I was an intern back in 2016. I consider their hardware to be the best in industry right now. their hardware specifically, mostly because of the amount of support it has from their community. They have a huge open source community that works on hacker projects together and does cool stuff like drive robotic prosthetics or use like alpha waves to drive drones and all that fun stuff. So personally, I like the OpenBCI headset, the OpenBCI board. The Unicorn Hybrid Black is another one that we've covered in our videos. I don't know if you guys have seen the gaming channel or the gaming video that we did where we were
Tinder,
controlling different games. Yeah, in the Tinder where we used P300 responses to control computer, basically just keystrokes on a computer. But yeah, I personally am biased towards OpenBCI because I work there, obviously.
Yeah, I mean the word best is there's not like one that we could point to because it depends on the scope, right? So if we're talking about the best to get up and running with, like for projects and like maybe to start your research if it's like lower budget, and then like OpenBCI is a really great option for that. And there are even some good on audio.
You're good. Yep,
there are even some like there's a lot of great research being done with OpenBCI and like the G-Tech headsets for sure, but there are also like a lot more expensive clinical grade headsets as well that go up to like 128 channels, so that might be useful for something. And then they also have non-electrical technologies like FNIRS, which Kernel is developed. I mean, there are a lot of companies doing it, but Kernel, I think, has probably raised the most money for a non-invasive brain-computer interface, and so they're measuring hemodynamic response. They're looking at blood flow and energy used in the brain. So really, it kind of depends on the application. And I know that's not a satisfying answer, but if you're looking to get started, definitely what Colin said.
Well, my thought about this is, what is the best? When it comes to Kernel's headset, they use both FNIRS and EEG at the same time so that you can get your temporal precision with the EEG, you get the spatial precision with the FNIRS, and that allows you to use a sensor fusion in order to figure out what is going on. So I guess that it depends on your budget to some extent too, because of course those are some advanced imaging things. There's fMRI that can do things like image deep brain structures and what's happening there, which is useful in ways that EEG might not be able to get to with that level of resolution. So there's the question of how many dimensions of control do you want to have for whatever you're building, or how many dimensions of sensing. And then of course there's the Cognionics headsets that cost like $20,000 to buy, and there's things that are on a different end, which is Backyard Brains. They sell spiker boxes and things like that where you can measure signals for under $1,000. I think almost all of their products, they can be bought for $1,000 or less for muscles or for brain signals.
Yeah.
The cool part about the industry right now is there's so many options, and that's really a huge difference from 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there was not even close. The EEG headset 10 years ago was a clinical device that cost $20,000 to $30,000 in some cases just to get those signals and just to put them through I forget what they're called, the little readers or whatever.
Signal processor,
yeah. So the fact that we even are able to talk about different brands and stuff is amazing, and it really shows the progress that the field is making. Let's get some quick ones out of the way here. Is Neuralink going to be available for the public to buy? So Neuralink is not in human subject trials at all yet. I don't believe so. They haven't done any human subject trials yet.
Yeah. So. Sorry, can I just jump in
go for
on that piece? Yeah, so they received breakthrough device designation from the FDA in, I think it was 2020. I think it was 2020, which basically means that the FDA will fast track the development of their implantable device. BlackRock, Neurotech, and Synchron have also received that designation. Now, that does not mean that you get to immediately go into humans. There are lots and lots of other bars to clear, as there should be, to make sure that the technology is safe. And so I do not think that they are in humans yet. I have looked. I'm pretty confident that they're not, although that's something to look out for tonight. Although interestingly, if you go onto their website, and I will find a link here.
Quick shout out to BlackRock Neurotech in the chat.
Is BlackRock there?
Oh yeah.
Hey, Alana. There she is. Alana's the person that does the social media. Yes, so Neuralink has this patient registry, which I just noticed. So this is not, you can't sign up for clinical trials right now, but I guess if you are someone that meets, that has a disability that meets these requirements, you can sort of join, I think, an email list, and they'll pick from people in the future. Again, there are, so this is, so you, if you're interested in that, you can look here, although if you are like a normal, neurologically speaking wise healthy individual, this is not something that would apply to you yet. But if you do meet these requirements, I encourage you to look at all of your options. So again, Synchron is in clinical trials, and so is BlackRock Neurotech, and so they are actively recruiting right now. So if you're looking for something more immediate, you can look there. But yeah, this link here, Con, can you send that out? Oh, I'm realizing that no one is seeing my screen as I'm showing it, but it's, I will send it in our chat here in case people are interested. But yeah, so there's this patient registry, and you can go through and answer questions if you believe that you meet those requirements.
Cool. Any other opinions on non-invasive? Or sorry, whether or not Neuralink will be available to the public. I'm trying to keep everything in my brain. There's so many conversations happening at once, and I'm trying to read.
Yeah, my thought about this is that medical technologies are a highly regulated industry. There are many things that a person needs to do in order to even get their device to even be on the market for doctors to implant into patients. And of course, you'll have to have a surgeon to implant those into patients, and the surgeon has to say yes. And they probably need to be trained on how to implant that particular device, and so on and so forth. So that is a long route to progress. It would be great if things could be faster and help people faster who really have no other options. But of course, things that are out on the market as invasive technologies, they are a much longer route to having it be in people's brains.
Cool.
Yeah. And that's,
All right.
I mean, that's important too if you're going to get an implant, right? Is like you want to make sure that it's been validated and tested, and is not a brand, at least for me, a brand new technology. I would want to know that it's, been thoroughly tested, and I think that's important for everyone to remember, that it's great to have the innovation keep going, but this is not like the rest of Silicon Valley where it's like move really fast, because the break things in this case is people's brains, and we can't have that. And I do want to emphasize that the industry broadly focuses quite a bit on ethics and making sure that people are safe. Okay, go ahead.
So Nate Austin asks, have you guys heard of open water? I'm assuming that's our new brain-computer interface. I have not personally. Do you want to give us some details on that?
Yeah, Mary Lou Jepson is the CEO of that, and I think that she has a very excellent physics background, extremely great technology. I think that also there is that question at the end of the day, is reading the brain reading the mind? And to some extent, well, it is, and to a lot of extent, it's very situationally dependent, where you might be able to read things like, are you thinking about places or faces? And if you're thinking about a face, which face in particular? And so this level of resolution, I'm looking forward to it being developed by various people. I think that in terms of looking at ways to, for example, get rid of brain cancer by having certain technologies that are using certain frequencies to be at the level of, well, distinguishing tumors from regular brain cells. That is going to be very fascinating, partly because there are FDA regulations regarding how much of what kinds of frequencies and what kinds of powers can be green lighted to go into a person's brain. And so
they're using ultrasound,
I'm looking
right?
forward to
Is that what I'm seeing?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Just I want to make sure that our viewers understand that technology as well. So if you wouldn't mind just very, very briefly explaining what the mechanics are of how that works.
Yeah, we can measure things from the brain as neuroscientists or neurotechnologists, but there's the question of how do we modulate brain activity? How do we change brain activity? One of the ways is by using ultrasound, which can interestingly mechanically stimulate the brain, and it will have certain mechanical indices and other acoustic properties to it. And it's kind of remarkable that that can do things like change the way that microtubules are, at least temporarily, and that can modulate activity partly also from changing membrane properties for a time. And so focused ultrasound, it is an interesting field. I'm looking forward to further developments in it. But of course, it hasn't really been done that much yet. It's more of an interesting thing in the future, it seems.
Very cool.
Cool.
Asa, I just saw a comment from you go by, so I know. Yeah, there you go. I see Colin. You got it too.
Yeah, I tagged him.
Asa is someone that we both know from undergrad and worked with in our neurotech research lab, and he asked when can he play Minecraft with his brain. We have a video where we did some very, very basic Minecraft gameplay with the G-Tech headset, and we want to do more of that. Although it would be really cool. So there's this person, Nathan Copeland, who has had a Utah array implanted, the BlackRock array, and then through the University of Pittsburgh, they did a lot of development and got it to a point where he could play video games. So if you go to his channel, BCI Can Do Better, you can actually see him play Final Fantasy and Pac-Man, and that's at a level that we cannot achieve with non-invasive tech right now, and it's really cool. And yeah, I'm going to see if we can get him to play a Minecraft game with us. I think that'd be fun.
We have Mike currently editing a video that's going to be fun as well, an RC car video, so keep on the lookout for that. Hey, we have a pretty recurring question here, specifically about getting involved in the BCI field, both as medical student. Feifo is a general medicine student who wants to get involved working with brain-computer interfaces. They would like to know how to do so. Also, we have Nonsense Speaks, who asks, I'm about to graduate with a BS in computer science, and I'd like to get involved with projects like Neuralink. Question is, what do we study in order to qualify for that sort of thing? Personally, I would say just start working with devices that you can get your hands on. Like I went to a club actually at our alma mater, at Harrison and I's and Mike's alma mater, and just basically asked them to sponsor the acquisition of an OpenBCI device, and then that led to basically everything that came after that. So I would say, try to find a way to get your hands on devices, or if you'd like to go more into the theoretical field, or you'd like to work with more medical grade devices, continue to go to school. Sharina's obviously done that, taken that route, and that route is also that's a little bit more work than what I did. I was just like, I just wanted to get my hands on something and just play with it. But I think both are very great ways to get started. Also, keep watching our videos. Maybe you'll learn a little bit.
Well, I think that the way that people should get into this field depends on what they're good at. Some people are wonderful at design, but they don't want to program things all day. In that case, then they might want to go into the user experience field and then eventually shift over to neural interfaces over time to do things like develop EMG signals, for instance, to measure from muscles, and then maybe eventually go to the brain, which is more complex. Another way to go through this is, okay, let's say that you've recently graduated undergrad and are wondering whether you should go to grad school as your next step, or whether you should go to industry as your next step, or just exploring options. In that case, then it might be good to work as a lab manager or a lab technician in a lab that does something with brain-computer interfaces. And then maybe you can learn to do things like mouse surgeries or various other things so that you know what you're getting into as your next step. And then there's digital signal processing. A lot of people, they don't well, they don't know that they're going to be great at programming until they actually learn what they need to Google, for instance. They might find that they're banging their head against a textbook until they know enough vocabulary in order to look up what they need to look up in this field. And then there's the people who are really good at clinical trials management. Maybe they're not great at programming. Maybe they're not great at putting things together in terms of designing things spatially, but they might be fantastic with people and helping them feel comfortable in a clinical environment. In that case, then they may want to look into the regulatory things and clinical trials management.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer, and I think
that captures
overall,
all
just
of it,
like no, it really does. There's definitely a need for computer science people. Build out a portfolio if you can. Remember that there are lots of companies in this space, and if Neuralink is your end goal, then that's great. But they, all of these companies on the top tier, like Neuralink, look for people with lots of experience. So just think about how you're going to get there. Look for internships, and there are many ways you can approach it. But just try to work into that space. But there's definitely a need. All right, we should be a little faster with the questions, probably.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So just real quick, the essence identity, I see your question here. The reason why I haven't addressed it yet is just because there isn't a lot of studies. So the question is, what effect would Neuralink have on the third eye pineal gland function within the brain? So there's a lot of scientific woohoo when it comes to the pineal gland. So I would just be careful about there's not a whole lot of information out there about that, or studies about like what these sort of devices might do. I don't necessarily see like a lot of the the subject matter on the pineal gland is not really scientifically based. It's more speculation and more of like pseudo scientific sort of religious based stuff, which is fine, but I don't think there's a lot of scientific precedence to answer your question about what effects the Neuralink might have on the pineal gland. Is that fair to say? Is that tracking with the room here?
I also want to say that the pineal gland is it's not like it's made up of neurons, as far as I understand. It's secreting hormones. So
Right.
this isn't something that you would be electrically stimulating. It's also it sits at the very back of the brainstem, so it's underneath a lot of brain matter. And Neuralink is focusing on penetrating tissue just very much at the top, just the cortex.
Yeah.
So this is not something that they would be doing specifically, although any type of stimulation in the front of the brain and areas of the prefrontal cortex can definitely have mood elevating effects and have certain effects on like I said, mood, but just mood, affect, what am I trying to say, just like mental state in general. So maybe kind of what you're getting at there, but not the pineal gland.
Yeah. So that was kind of a woohoo question. I just wanted to, he asked like 3 or 4 times. I just wanted to make sure I acknowledged it. Looks like Neuralink might be starting here in just a second. Looks like they just changed their splash on the CNET thing. We will let you know when they're live, but they're still in the sort of waiting room phase, it looks like. But they did change their splash, so I just wanted to let everyone know that might be starting here soon.
Yep.
Okay, quick. Let's go through another one. Synchron requires an eye tracking device to use, correct? I thought their device is only used for mouse clicks. Yeah, so from my understanding with Synchron, it's basically an EEG, but within the cell wall or within the veins or the arteries or whatever of the brain. And they still require things like eye trackers to move a cursor around a screen rather than using something like premotor imagery or motor imagery or the one that we covered in the course, I forget what it's called, vector coding or something.
Mm-hmm. So their system, for anybody that doesn't know, it's inserted up through blood vessels into a vein that sits on the top of the brain, and it has, I think, 16 electrodes that embed into the cell walls. There are some issues that you have with signal quality just in terms of you're farther away from the neurons than being embedded in like a system like Neuralink or BlackRock. But it can do very broad sampling. So that can be useful in some situations, not useful in others. For brain-computer interfacing, what this gets us is it sits in the area of the brain that's right next to the motor cortex that controls our leg movements. So you can't really get arm movements, but what they did was when someone imagined kicking up their leg, that would click, and they use eye tracking to move the cursor around. So it's a little bit different than a system like BlackRock has, or that I'm imagining that Neuralink is developing, where you're driving a cursor or actually moving something around. But it, in a roundabout way, gets there, but it's like a little bit wonky in the terms of like you kick to click and holds the leg up, I believe, to zoom. But there are in different applications, there are ways that it could be beneficial or less beneficial.
In my personal opinion, and I think that this might be echoed either in the audience or in this call even, Synchron's sort of overstated their abilities. But we'll get into that a little bit more in the future. We already kind of got into that in one of our videos. Any other opinions on Synchron?
No, I mean, yeah, we could go down that route all day, but I'm just,
right, yeah.
I think there are interesting parts of the technology to talk about at another time, but let's keep it Neuralink focused. Yep. Especially because they are doing stuff right now. And hold on.
They're still in the pre-show here. Is stem cell research at all a part of the industry, or are dish brains too low order to make overlap relevant for what the industry is after? From Christopher Bruce there. I think that's sort of a question for Sharina, actually. I'm not super familiar with whether or not they have. So are there petri dish brain implant research? Is anything like that going on right now?
Yeah, there is, because there is that question of can you do things like treat a person with a traumatic brain injury by implanting, say, cells that were grown in dishes that were made from that person's own tissues into that person's brain. Mm-hmm. I don't think that I've seen anything where that has actually been done in a human yet, in terms of actually implanting the person's brain cells into their brain that have been cultured in a dish, but it's definitely an interesting matter. When it comes to neural development, though, there is a sort of way that the cells migrate over time, such that there are structures of how these neurons are creating their cortical columns and all of their organization under that, which is somewhat hard to get into a dish and then to eventually integrate into an actual living brain. But we can do things like determine cellular properties and what kinds of properties of which cells tend to connect with which cells in dishes, which can then be thought of in the greater field of what kinds of signals are they sending, how are they talking with each other, and how can this be implemented possibly with a brain-machine interface in order to get these two pieces to connect with each other well. Okay, let's go.
Sorry to cut you off. Yeah, Neuralink is starting, guys. Thank you everybody for joining us. Do we want to keep this rolling while they while they present, and then just sort of send the link here? We'll send the link to the CNET. Oh wait, I'm sorry, never mind.
They're still doing their
they just
changed the slide. I've got it up so that people can see.
They just psyched me out there. I thought that I saw something going across the screen that was a different animation, and I got all excited.
I've got it up here. We'll make sure everybody knows. I think we can keep providing commentary as we go through. We'll,
Do you wanna? I mean, I'll message you in the chat.
Yeah. Give us another question. Yeah.
Does the brain only compute via electrical potentials? If related, this is from Ravenous. If related, how do you not have the two systems interfering with each other? And how do you know you are able to purely? How do you know you're able to? I think the question is how do you know that you're just getting stuff from the brain and not through the electrical interface? It's an interesting question.
Oh, okay, that's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, well, things need to be shielded to some extent because there's electrical noise all around us to some extent. There are 60 hertz hertz noises that come through things like the plugs in our home. And so a lot of the works that are done with measuring tiny potentials are done in rooms that are called Faraday cages, which are shielded from cellular signals and signals that are from the walls that we don't want to measure. So there's that. And also, how do we know that? Well, one thing is that we need to have our systems grounded so that we are sure that we are referencing whatever thing that we think that we're measuring from a ground that is consistent, so that we are not kind of pulling things from the air. How does this work with a real human? I think that there also needs to be some sort of common reference and ground to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then other signals, yes, there are chemical signals. The chemical signals and their gradients are what lead to an electrical signal. So there are sodium and potassium and magnesium channels in the brain, as well as many others like calcium. And that allows things like electricity or electrical charge buildups to be created through these potentials and gradients.
I want to say too, it very simply, it matters how close you are to the neurons that you're recording.
Right.
If you have an electrode right in the neuron or right next to it, you're gonna have to worry a lot less about someone's cell phone, for example. But if you're doing something where you're measuring magnetic changes that are created by changing electromagnetic fields when neurons fire, like you'll need the Faraday cage that Sharina is talking about. But let's keep the questions moving here. Any questions we can get for Mike? I want to hear Mike's takes on what's going on.
I'm just excited. I want to see. This feels like an Apple type hype.
They do showmanship very, very well. Oh, I'm probably too far away from my mic, but they do showmanship very, very well, I will say. So I'm interested to see what they've got to show. So this is expected to mostly be a recruiting opportunity, which is a recruiting event, which is usually what they do. I had heard from people that I know that have interned there and work within the company rumblings that there's been a lot of frustration coming down from Musk at the pace of development. And I think a lot of that just comes from what Sharina was saying earlier, that these things take time and they should take time so that we know that it's actually safe. I think that that's probably not an environment that Musk is used to with some of the other companies. And so I had heard originally that part of the reason that this event was happening in October was like, let's put some pressure on people to just show something and to get something out there. And then it was pushed back because they weren't quite ready yet. So that's something that we might see. And, you know, I think this is primarily a recruiting event, so it'll be interesting to see what angle they approach. I think that they will probably start pivoting towards being able to say, like, okay, researchers, like, start using this. But who knows, because they've also been very, very secretive, and they might want to keep all of that within their walls. So that's going to be something to watch. And then while I'm on the topic of things to watch, there was a lot of controversy brought up about their treatment of animals, of monkeys specifically at UC Davis, which they addressed in a number of posts. In brain-computer interface research, just like a lot of scientific research, there are always questionable things that are done, but you know, in the end, to make these technologies safer. But I don't know specifically to this. There were 17,000 doctors that signed something, so it may be out of the ordinary, but it'll be interesting to see that if they address that. All right, those are my two things I wanted to get out of the way to pay attention to. I've been holding on to those. So.
And I have things to get out of the way.
Go for it.
Which is that machines, they are relatively fast, and a lot of the advances in electrical engineering, they've seemed to far outpace things in neurotechnology, partly because if you're building something like a sewing machine to implant things, then the great thing is that you don't have to wait for that machine to heal itself. But when it comes to the biological tissue, you do have to wait for things to heal. And brains, as they are healing, then the electrical activity around that implant, they might change over time as the immunological response from the tissue takes care of that. And then that probe and the machine that's attached to that probe learns about how to interpret this brain's processing of the environment and what kinds of commands it's trying to send out.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Yeah, let's keep it moving here. So quick question here from Nomo Gomo. I love that name.
I
Any
love you too.
possibility? Yeah, it's great. Any possibility for performing rights with non-invasive BCIs? Yes. There's something called magnetic
For performing what?
cranial rights. So like
Oh, like writing to the brain. Sure.
stimulating neurons.
Stimulating.
Yeah. So that's transcranial magnetic stimulation. That uses magnetic waves to sort of non-invasively, definitely non-invasively, actually stimulate different areas of neurons within the brain. Harrison actually has personal experience using TMS, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. So TMS is one modality. I use TMS for chronic migraine treatment, which is really cool. It's also used for a lot of mental health reasons as well. And so it's broad stimulation of neurons. You're causing them to fire. Ultrasound, which Serena talked about earlier, is a way to, with actually impressive localization. So you can get pretty specific, considering it's non-invasive, with ultrasound at penetrating and causing little areas to stimulate. This is done a lot with electrodes that go into the brain. So there have been interfaces that allow people to feel through prosthetic by stimulating the areas of the brain that are associated with feeling in the hand. Same thing with like visual stuff, which is cool. There's been research in memory. So where they would stimulate a part of a rat's brain, the hippocampus, while they were doing a task, and they found that the memory was quite enhanced. I even saw some very, very, very like early stage memory transfer from one rat to another, which was an interesting paper. I don't have a lot of time to get into. But one thing that I want to point out is like, it's not like you can just kind of download information. I don't see that being something that's really possible, or at least not in a very long time, because for information to get into the brain, it's not like a hard drive. You have to form that in pathways in between neurons, and that forms by repetitive stimulation of those exact pathways. And you kind of do that through experience. So maybe you could live through an experience in more immersive ways over and over again with a brain-computer interface. That would definitely increase learning. But I think most likely we would see these devices as like accessing a database and just doing that a lot faster. So similar to how we interact with technology now, where it's a computer, it's something else, but way faster interaction, way more immersive interaction. Anyway.
Cool. Yeah, so just real quick, Harrison, if you could check the Zoom chat, that'd be great.
Oh, we got things changing in Neuralink, so I'm going to put that up and check the... Yeah, I think... So yeah, I'd like to continue going as we do this.
The presentation starts. Yeah.
We will. I'm going to put on captions here. Oh, captions aren't available. So their event is starting now. We could try to play audio and cut in and out as long as we're making enough commentary, or maybe people can have us open in a separate window.
Just keep it just kind of lower, and then we can talk over it. Maybe that's fine too.
All right, I will do that. So if you want to stick with us as we do that, you're welcome to. Wow, I'm sorry for destroying everyone's eardrums. I know that was loud. I'm so sorry. All right, so we got a little promo thing, and it is actually starting now. So here we go.
Can you send me the link to the stream you're on, by the way?
What do you mean?
Welcome to the
just so I can keep up with it and we can do it live.
I've got it up here. Can you just find that so that...
Oh, wait, yeah, we're good.
Sorry, everyone.
Tell you about the future of what we're planning to do here.
Here's the man.
It's now this is meant to be a technical podcast, sort of like a I'm gonna provide an overall summary, and then we're gonna have a number of members of the Neuralink team come in and give a deep technical overview of the various areas. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, so let me move forward with the overall summary. Now, some of the things I'm going to say are things if you've been following Neuralink, you've already heard before, but for a lot of people out there, they've no idea what Neuralink does, and so I'll be a little bit repetitive of things you may already know, but that others do not. So, the overarching goal of Neuralink is to create ultimately a whole brain interface. So
here we go, talking about that input-output, that stimulation that someone was talking about before.
Device that, in the long term, literally could interface with every aspect of your brain, and in the short term, can interface with any given section of your brain and solve a tremendous number of things that cause debilitating issues for people. So, so our long term is I'll talk a little bit about our long term goal. It's going to sound a little esoteric, but it was actually the sort of my prime motivation, which was, what do we do about AI? Like, what do we do about artificial general intelligence? If we have digital superintelligence that's just
so it's
much
interesting
smarter than
that
any
he has a
human,
more subdued tone.
how do
so
we
he's still hitting on those same
mitigate that
elements
risk?
of we're interested in
at
AI integration.
at a species level, how do we mitigate
but
that
because
risk?
this is probably a recruiting event
And
to
then even
scientists,
in a
it's a
benign
little bit
scenario
more
where
pulled back, reasonable, but still aspirational.
the AI
which is just
is
interesting to see.
very, very benevolent.
I find it interesting
Then
that
how
he
do we
says the
even
long-term goal
go
is
along
to be
for the
able to
ride? How
interface
do
with every
we
part of the brain.
participate?
Yeah.
We don't understand every part of the brain yet,
And
but
Well, this
it
could
is
help.
exciting.
Neural
the
interfaces
thing
could
that
help,
the
yeah.
biggest limitation in going along for the ride and in aligning AI, I think, is the bandwidth, the how quickly you can interact with the computer. So we are all already cyborgs in a way, in that your phone and your computer are extensions of yourself.
Yeah, this is
Put in the
something he
chat
said
if
quite
you-
a few
I'm sure
times,
like
that
if you,
we're already cyborgs.
leave your phone behind.
But it's interesting
you
that
can
his
end up
main
tapping
goal
your
is
pockets and
supposedly
it's like having missing limb
you know,
syndrome.
basically
the phone is
what's
it is
the word?
leaving
The,
your phone behind is kind of like a missing link at
singularity,
this point.
right?
You're so
Creating a
used
way
to
for us
interfacing
to
with it. You're so
interface
used to
directly with
being
AIs.
a de facto cyborg.
Yeah, this is my favorite question is
But-
to ask
but
what
so-
is
so
the
what's the
definition of a cyborg?
limitation
If people have
on a-
one, put it
on
in
a
the chat.
phone
And we'll
or
highlight the ones we like.
a
Sharina had the
laptop?
best
The
answer in the world
limitation
to
is
this, but we'll get to that later.
the rate at which you can receive and send information, especially the speed with which you can send information. So if you're interacting with a phone, it's limited by the speed at which you can move your thumbs, or the speed at which you can talk into your phone. This is an extremely low data rate. Maybe it's like 10, optimistically 100 bits per second, but a computer can communicate at gigabits, terabits per second. So this is the fundamental limitation.
What's interesting is
that I think we need to address to mitigate.
He keeps bringing
the
up this
long-term
bandwidth issue,
risk
right?
of
But
artificial
fundamentally,
intelligence,
there's a speed
and
limit for
also just go along
neurons,
for the
right?
ride.
I
And,
wonder how that would be overcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
So,
that's,
but
that's
like,
another
that's-
reason why you can't
that's-
just like
that's an
download
esoteric
information, right?
explanation
Is
that I think
you have to
will
electricity
appeal to
goes
a niche
through a neuron,
audience.
and then there's a gap, and it has to
some of
make
whom may be
chemicals
here.
come out of one, go to another, and
but
so it travels at about 256
and that's
miles an
that's a
hour,
very
which is a
difficult
lot
problem.
slower
So
than the speed
even
of
if we do
light,
not
which is what
succeed
electricity would
with
travel
that
at.
problem,
So you just have to be creative about how
I
you
think
think
we
about these things.
like
I'm
we
not
are
saying it's not
confident at
possible,
this
but
point that we will succeed at many. It's solving many brain injury issues, spine injury issues along the way. So, yeah. So, anyways.
Interesting body language.
So,
No,
actually
not
we
very
have,
salesman-esque.
Yeah.
No,
Justin
it's
Roiland
very
in the audience.
odd for him, I
this is a-
feel. But again, I think
Hi,
it's
Justin.
they've gotten a lot of
So,
backlash
still a little Rick
for
and Morty
being
reference
too
here.
like we can do this, we can do
the,
that. So because this is
This
recruiting,
great
I
Rick
think
and Morty
he's trying to
episode
like
about
reel it in,
intelligence
but while still
enhancement
keeping
of
with
your dog, and
the vision.
what's the worst that could happen?
But it's,
So,
and there we go. There's our first
anyway, Rick and Morty,
uncomfortable
I
joke
recommend
of the
it.
night. Last
So
time he was talking about getting your brain hacked.
So
and it's
you
like,
want
oh
to be able
God,
to
this
read the
is not
signals from the
good
brain.
for our
You want to be able to
industry to be stressing
write
people out about
the
stuff that is
signals.
very far away right now. But good conversation.
You want to be able to ultimately do that for the entire brain, and then also extend that to communicating to the rest of your nervous system. If there's
we often don't
if you
know
have
how to read a
sort of
memory
severed
or to
spinal
write
cord or
a
neck.
memory in the brain, but
So
we can
now
get
this is
something
this video
like
is now
motor
18
changes.
months old.
Probably
so
the
this
most
is
easy.
Pager, who is playing monkey mind
This is
pong.
that example we saw
So
earlier.
This is Pager has a Neuralink implant in this video, and the thing that's interesting is that you can't even see the neural implant. So we've miniaturized the neural implant to the point where it matches the thickness of the skull that is removed. So it's essentially it's sort of like having an Apple Watch or a Fitbit.
And hey, we did a video about Pager if you guys want to check it out.
Like
Great point. Drop that link.
You know, a
Drop that
smartwatch,
link.
for lack of a better.
Is Pager still
analogy.
kicking?
So
That's a good question.
Statistically, no.
so you can see. You can really
Statistically,
it looks
Pager
pretty
is
easy.
not, but we don't know. I do not know that.
I think that's pretty important. If you have a Neuralink device, like I could have a Neuralink device implanted right now, and you
He
wouldn't
seems to be fairly healthy in that video, so
you wouldn't even know. I mean,
you're right. This is a huge point that he's
hypothetically-
talking about, though, that you don't see any signature of the device. I wonder what that means in terms
maybe
of
one of
data
these
quality.
demos. In fact,
but you know, assuming that it does have good data quality,
One of
this
these
is really
demos I
big
will.
because a lot of other systems do have something that you can
Yeah.
see visibly. So
So yeah. Anyway, so here's I mean, first of all, like, it's kind of wild. Hey, monkeys can play Pong. They're like they can actually play Pong if you give them a joystick. So Pedro first learned to play Pong with a joystick. So I'm like, that was novel. It's like I didn't know monkeys could play Pong, but
I
they
know
can.
that Nathan Copeland,
And
who's
then so we first
someone
trained
that has a
Pedro to
brain
play
implant,
Pong with a joystick. Then we took
one of
the
the
joystick away
BlackRock
and
ones
have
wanted
the
to
Neuralink.
challenge
And
Pager
now
to a Pong
this
event,
is
and I really
just
wish
playing
that would have happened,
it's a
because that would have been really funny.
telepathic video games, essentially. So what we've been doing since then
Have a Neuralink
is
versus BlackRock Neurotech.
we've been on the very difficult journey
Yes.
from prototype to
battle.
product. And I've often said that prototypes are easy, production is hard. It's really, I'd say, 100 to 1,000 times harder to go from
I wonder if they have
go
the
from
robot
prototype to
and stuff
a
behind.
device that is
Very interested to see what they've
safe,
actually got to show.
reliable.
I just
Works
love
under a
that
wide
the
range of
narrative has
circumstances,
switched
is
from
affordable,
oh yeah, we're
and
gonna
done at
stream music
scale.
directly to the brain, and we're gonna
It's
do all this, and
insanely
we're gonna
difficult.
improve your brain with
Um,
neurons, to just like, oh no, it's actually a
There's
lot
no
harder
saying that
than
it-
we thought it was.
It's 1% inspiration,
I know.
99% perspiration, but I think
I
it
know.
might be 99%, 99.9% perspiration.
Well, you have a lot of people that get excited
the
about
best
that,
example I
which
could give
is
of
awesome. We should get excited about it.
an
But then
idea
the problem
being easy, the
becomes like
execution being hard is going
people
to the
with
moon.
disabilities feel
It's,
like this is a thing
the
that they
idea
can
of
have
going to the
now,
moon,
and then it's
easy.
not. But it's
Going to the moon,
interesting. I think
very
because the
hard.
backlash, again, this is much more subdued than I expected,
And
I'm glad
we're
I'm glad to
working
see
hard
that. Like, this is
Yeah,
pretty
it's a good step.
be
reasonable
ready for our
so
first
far,
human,
reasonable and honest, and I'm
obviously
liking this
we
tone
want to
shift.
be extremely careful and certain that it will work well before putting a device in a human. But we've submitted, I think, most of our paperwork to the FDA, and we think probably in about 6 months we should be able to have our first Neuralink in a human.
All right,
Interesting.
that's huge. So
6 months.
they
wow.
think 6 months, but you still have to. So I wonder if they've applied for a clinical
But
trial.
as
So
I said,
far. It seems like they've been
we
working
do
with the
everything we
FDA, but
possibly
you
can
usually have to
to
do that
test the devices
under another center.
for,
But that's interesting.
not necessarily
Although
going
also
into
at the
human
same time
before
they
even
said they'd
going
have them in
into,
humans in
an
2020.
animal.
So like,
we do
who knows? But
benchtop
at least
testing, we do accelerated
you know,
accelerated life
they've
testing.
have proven
We
some
have
applications.
a fake
to this
brain
point in
simulator
monkeys.
that has the texture and it's like emulating a brain, but it's sort of rubber. And so before we would even think of putting a device in an animal, we do everything we possibly can with rigorous benchtop testing. So we're not cavalier in putting devices into animals. We're extremely careful, and we always want the device, whenever we do the implant, if it's in a sheep or a pig or monkey, to be confirmatory, not exploratory, so that
It's
Really
an important
done
step
everything we
for trust
possibly
from the
can
medical
with
community.
benchtop testing, and
Yeah.
only then would we consider
I'm really.
putting a device.
This
in
is a
an
good
animal.
tone shift. That was
Yeah.
needed.
And, we'll actually show you.
So-
Also
demo
directly
later today
addressing a
of-
lot of the
in a few hours, really.
the
of,
fear and uncertainty
of
that we've
implanting
seen
in a brain
about
capsule.
Neuralink.
And if anyone in the audience
is an
wants to
interesting
volunteer,
The fact that he's acknowledging it
with
as
the
well
robot right
is
there.
very interesting to me.
Yeah. Especially because
So,
like it was stoked a little bit
since
in
the
the
Pager
beginning.
demo,
like
we've
some of the
expanded
jokes
to
that
work
were
with a
made.
troop
So
of
this is good to
6
see.
monkeys.
All right, let's see.
We've actually upgraded Pager. They do varied tasks, and we do everything possible to ensure that things are stable and replicable, and that that the device lasts for a long time without degradation. So.
I want to get more information on
what you're seeing there is, it looks like the matrix.
Sure.
So that's actually that's a real output of neural signals. So that's
Okay.
not a simulation or just a screensaver or something. Those are actual neurons firing.
Tell us more.
That is
I
one
would
of the-
love
one
to
of the
Yeah,
results.
see
see,
what the
that's not as-
technical stuff is. What does that actually mean? Actual
Yeah.
neurons firing. See, that's different from saying that it's encoding
And,
actual words.
Here you can see
But okay, here we go. Sorry.
Sake, it's one of our other monkeys, typing on a keyboard. But now this is
Okay.
telepathic typing. So, to be
So
clear, this is
what we're
the-
seeing here. So this is
he's
very
not
cool.
actually using a keyboard. He's moving.
So you see this yellow
a-
piece
a-
going
the
across. That's a
cursor
target.
with
So
his
he's not
mind,
picking the words, but he's
to the
moving that
highlighted
cursor
key.
with his mind
Now, technically,
and selecting letters. And then
can't actually spell. And
yeah. So I think he's going to say that right now.
So I don't want to oversell this thing, because that's the next
Yeah.
version.
New headline: Neuralink gives monkeys the ability to speak.
But what's really cool here is Sake the monkey is moving the mouse cursor using just his mind,
Which is
moving the
pretty much
cursor
monkey
around
mind
to the
pong,
highlighted
except more
key,
dramatic.
and then spelling out
Right.
what we-
Yeah. It's a similar
you know,
thing. I
what we
mean,
want-
he's just moving a cursor
what
around,
we
which
want to
is
spell, but
very cool.
and then,
This is something like we showed you
so
earlier.
this
This is
is,
something that has been done
something that could be used
with
for
the
somebody who's-
BlackRock
who's,
interface.
say,
But I will say that considering that they started this in
quadriplegic or tetraplegic,
2016,
human,
that rate of development
even
is,
before we
is
make the
pretty
s-
impressive
the
that they're
spinal cord
at
stuff
that
work,
point. They're not.
is being
I wouldn't say
able
that they're
to,
caught up because this was one of the
control
earlier things that was
a
done in
mouse
like
cursor, control a
I
phone.
want to say somewhere around 2006.
And
but
we're confident that
that's very cool. The pace of innovation.
someone who has basically no other interface to the outside world would be able to control their phone better than someone who has working hands. So.
It's interesting that they hit on the phone piece because they have a mock application on their
I
website,
mentioned
which
upgradability.
is like just kind of
Upgradability is very
interesting that
important.
they're focusing on
'cause
that.
our
I mean,
first
it
production
makes sense from a communications
device
perspective.
will be much
but
like an iPhone 1, and I'm pretty sure you would not want an iPhone 1 stuck in your head if the iPhone 14 is available. So it's going to be being able to demonstrate full reversibility and upgradability, so you can remove a device and replace it with the latest version, or if it stopped working for any reason, replace it. That's a fundamental requirement for the device at Neuralink.
Yeah,
And
I'll be
I
very
should say
interested to
both Saki
see.
and Pager were upgraded to our latest and greatest implants. So
Oh, Pager is still alive,
that's
Mike.
been really over a year and a half now that
Thank God.
Pager's had
Thank God.
the first implant and then the upgraded implant. So this is a very good sign that it lasts for a long
Pager
time.
needs like
with
a social
no,
media account or something.
observed ill effects.
Yeah, for real.
Day in the life. Then we can actually see if what the
I
conditions.
think it's
are.
also important to show that
Damn, he has a
Saki
nicer
actually
computer than I
likes
do.
doing the demo, and is not like strapped to the chair or anything. So it's yeah.
That's cool.
So the monkeys actually enjoy doing the demos because they get the banana smoothie, and it's kind of a fun game. So I
is a
guess
very
what I'm trying
cute
to make is
demo.
like we care a great deal about animal welfare, and I'm pretty sure like our monkeys are pretty happy, you know. So as you can see,
Yeah, so
quick
they're trying
decision
to address
maker
those
on the food
concerns.
front.
I hope that we do get more reporting out, like
Oh.
from the original photos, to see if that is just
So
standard
for our-
stuff
the-
or more.
The
but
first two applications
that
we're
they're
going to
addressing
aim
this.
for in humans are restoring vision, and
interesting.
I think this is like notable in
So-
that even if someone has never had vision ever, like they were born blind, we believe we can still restore vision.
Well,
so
that's so
because
the
the
restoring
visual part
vision to
of
somebody who's never
the visual
had
cortex is still there.
vision before.
So
Just because that part of the brain's there, it's been
yeah, even
co-opted
if
for
they've
other
never
things
seen
at that point,
before,
right? Like it's your brain
we're confident
reorganizes
they
itself to
could
be as
see.
efficient as possible constantly. So if
and
you
then
haven't had that input your whole
the
life,
other application being
I wonder
in the
how
motor cortex, where
I wonder how much
we would
precedence there is
initially enable
scientifically for what
someone
he said there
who,
about restoring sight
has
somebody who's
no
never been able to see
ability
before.
almost no
Yeah, so
ability
not
to
necessarily.
operate
I don't want to harp on this too much
their
because
muscles,
I want to
sort of like a sort of Stephen
people can hear
Hawking
this,
type situation.
but
and,
that there's
enable them
always
to
some
operate
migration, but
their
I've
phone
seen
faster than
that
someone
there's
who has
evidence to
working
suggest
hands.
that stimulating that
But
area
then
even
obviously
later in
better
life
than that
can
would be
produce
to
visual
bridge the
artifacts to
connection.
the extent that that could be complex
So,
vision is another thing.
Take
Visual
the
system is very
signals
complex,
from
but
the motor cortex and
so this area at the
let's say
back of the
somebody's
brain, the
got a broken
occipital
neck,
lobe,
then
is
bridging those signals
very involved
to
in vision.
Neuralink
It kind of
devices
starts back
located
there
in
and
the
then
spinal
moves
cord.
forward and gets more
So,
dispersed throughout the brain. But that's sort of target one, which is why
confident there are
targeting
there are
this
no
area.
physical limitations to enabling full body functionality. I mean, as miraculous as it may sound, we're confident that it is possible to restore full body functionality to someone who has a severed spinal cord. So, yeah.
That I could definitely see the severed spinal cord part. Like it's really just bridging that gap, right, of where the nerves no longer connect.
All right.
Whoops.
And then
yeah,
I
I'm
want
gonna
to
see if I can
emphasize again
find
that
an
the
example. So
primary
they've
purpose
used,
of this update
there's
is
been work in
recruiting.
humans where an
Um,
implant has been used to collect signals
a lot of
up
times
in the
people
brain and then
think
use that to
that
stimulate an arm.
They, they
So
can really work at
someone,
Neuralink
Ian
because they
Burkhart,
don't know anything about biology
who
or how
has
brains work.
gone through that research.
And the thing that we really want to emphasize here is
and then you
that
sort of have that with the prostate
you
control
don't
as
need
well.
to,
But I will,
because
I'll
when you
touch on
break
that more
down
later.
the skills that are needed to make Neuralink work, it's actually many of the same skills that are required to make a smartwatch or
here you go, addressing
modern
some of
phone
those
work.
questions earlier.
So
Looks
it's
like
sort
they're
of,
looking heavily on the software side
software,
of things. Yep, and there he says it.
batteries, radios, inductive charging, and as well as things that are specific to us, like animal care and clinical and regulatory matters. Obviously, machine learning. That phrase is used a lot. But we obviously need to interpret the signals from the brain, which is a biological neural net, and the best thing to interpret a biological neural net is a digital neural net.
There's always this arms
this is,
race
like, if there's
of
one
machine
message I
learning
wanna
capability
convey
versus
is
neural
that
recording, because
if you have expertise,
if you're recording
in
from
creating
a million
advanced,
electrodes, like that isn't all that useful today because we can't
devices
process
like
it. But as these go together,
watches
we'll
and
see
phones,
advancements
computers,
rapidly with this whole
then
brain recording idea.
your capabilities would be of great use in solving these important problems. That's more than anything the message I want to convey. Let's see. Yeah. So with that, I guess DJ.
Did they give him a tranquilizer before he went on stage?
Some kind of.
I appreciate it though. I appreciate.
Yeah.
I am very happy with.
He looks like he just had a good
delivered.
cry.
DJ's was on the founding
Oh, the
team
Elon
of
fans are gonna
Neuralink
kill you in
and
the
has
chat right
made
now.
immense contributions to the company, as of many of the others who will present. But I want just to thank DJ for his immense contribution to Neuralink and. All right. Cool. Thank you.
I trust
Thanks,
a man
Elon.
that can keep his shoes that clean, honestly. So.
When I moved
Yes.
from South Korea at age 13 and needed to learn a new language to communicate, I wondered whether there are better and more effective means of communicating my thoughts to the outside world. And
Can people listening to the
watching
stream
Neo
hear
learn Kung Fu
the
and the
Neuralink
Matrix,
piece okay through our
I
audio?
remember
Yeah, I
thinking,
checked. Yeah,
You
we're
asked.
good.
wow.
Okay, great.
I checked
I want to work
also
on that.
my machine.
Work on making that possible. And today, I believe that this is a tractable engineering challenge. Since everything about your intentions, your thoughts, and your experiences are all in your brain, encoded as firing statistics of action potentials, if you're able to put electrodes in the right places with the right sensing and stimulation capabilities, this and many other applications that Elon talked about are possible, and we can help a lot of people. I'm incredibly excited to be working on this ambitious yet important mission to make that future a reality here at Neuralink. And I'm also incredibly honored to be working with some of the brilliant colleagues, scientists and engineers across many engineering disciplines, to work on this intersection of biology and technology. You'll hear from several of them today to learn about the breadth of technical challenges we face and our progress in the last year. And I think you'll find that for most of these challenges, as Elon mentioned, you don't need a prior understanding of how the brain works, and that a lot of what we do is applying engineering first principles to biology. So how do you create a high bandwidth generalized interface to the brain?
The anticipation.
From day one, we focused on a set of foundational technologies that are safe, scalable, and capable of accessing all areas of the brain. These three axes, safety, scalability, and access to brain regions, really form the basis for how we engineer products here at Neuralink. Safety, because we want to make our devices as well as the installation as safe as possible so that we can drive the adoption of this technology. And scalability, because as we make our devices safer and more useful, more people will want it. And with scale, we also want to make it more affordable. And access to brain regions,
be a huge piece
so that we can
expand this type of research is astronomically expensive right now, and I have a lot of concerns about how you get the price down doing something like brain surgery.
So our first steps along these dimensions for our device is what we call the N1 implant.
Reduce cost and what that actually looks like.
It's a size of about a quarter, and it has over 1,000 channels that are capable of recording and stimulating.
It looks like they have 385 employees.
It's microfabricated on a flexible thin film arrays that we call threads. It's fully implantable and wireless, so no wires, and after the surgery, the implant is under the skin.
These are those threads that go into the brain individually, so that
it also has a battery that you can charge wirelessly, and
to reduce
you can use it
pulling, scarring on the brain tissue.
So similarly, for implanting our device safely into the brain,
here we go. Here's the robot.
We built a surgical robot that we call the R1 robot. It's capable of maneuvering these tiny threads. They're only on the order of
This is a really interesting innovation.
And inserting them reliably into a moving brain while avoiding vasculature.
Some people that I know that have worked there,
they've said that this is
in their opinion, the coolest part about what
the killer app.
Because we've never shown an end-to-end insertion.
I wonder how it
a
works
robot
in terms
in action.
Of safety. I was initially concerned there'd be too much trauma
the robot
going in multiple times, but maybe it's thin enough that
who wants
it doesn't
to see
create
some
trauma.
insertions?
Well, here we go. I guess we'll see. Oh, this is a little scary and very
here
cool.
it is. That's our R1 robot with our patient Alpha, who's lying comfortably on the patient bed.
All right. Well, we found out what's behind the curtain.
This is what we call the targeting view. So what you're seeing is this is a picture of our brain proxy. And the pink represents the cortical surface that we want to insert our electrodes into. And the black represents the vasculatures that we want to avoid. And what you're seeing is these hash marked with numbers that represents where we intend to put each of our threads. So should we see some insertions?
Yeah. So supposedly this
is another view real quick. On the left
is
the view of the insertion area. And on the right, what the robot's going to do is it's going to peel the array,
toxic and can kill neurons,
the threads one by one from its silicon backing and insert it into the targets that we predetermine in the targeting view. So
this must be a fun job getting to play
there you
around
go.
with this.
That's the first insertion. So we're going to see a couple more insertions.
crash test dummies from Mythbusters we're doing now. Well,
The
here's
whole
your answer.
process of inserting
been a
about
rough
64
fall for
threads
them.
in our first product is going to be around 15 minutes for this robot. So
And they're used to
yeah,
rough
there's
falls.
a second one that went in, and we're going to do a third one.
That's cool. I wish I could see the
There you
light
go.
a
And then
little
that's
bit
gonna
better.
go in the
I'm
background,
looking
and
to
we'll
see if
come
there's
back to it
brain
in the
jiggle
later part of the
overall, and we probably
presentation.
can't see it at this scale, but I mean, it looks pretty clean within that. Obviously, this is not actual biological tissue, but this seems really
And
fascinating.
as Elon mentioned,
my one concern would
we've
be
been
that
working very
trauma
hard
of pushing it
to go
but,
from prototype to building product.
you know, but I don't know how this actually works.
As
in
part of
practice,
this,
so.
one of the things that we did is to move our device manufacturing to a dedicated facility in Austin for scale-up manufacturing. And what's important to highlight, and is evident in this clip, is that it's very typical for us to have our engineers who design also work on the physical manufacturing line to build and debug. And this has been extremely, extremely critical in reducing our iteration cycle time.
This is interesting considering that they don't
And we've
have
also
a product out
scaled
yet,
up our
that
surgery.
they're already looking
So
to
we now
scale
have
up.
a
It makes me
dedicated,
wonder about what their
our own
timelines
OR.
are and how many people
In fact,
will
a
actually be
double
in
OR,
this clinical trial.
in Austin.
Because you wouldn't think that you need an
And
entire
this is just a
facility for
stepping stone
manufacturing in just the early
before
research
we
stages. So
eventually build our own Neuralink clinic.
that's very interesting.
So with this product,
Interesting
N1 and
too
R1,
that they said Neuralink clinic.
our
So
initial goal is
I
to
know
help
that they'd
people
said they
with
wanted this to be an
paralysis
outpatient
from
thing.
complete
If that's
spinal cord
possible,
injury,
that would be huge.
regain
if
their
you don't have to
digital
go to a
freedom
hospital.
by enabling them to use their devices as good
I
as,
don't
if
know
not better,
if that's
than
gonna
they
be
could
possible.
before
Yeah,
but
injury.
when
we'll
would
talk
that
about
be? You know,
I don't
that's
know.
the real
And as
question.
Elon mentioned,
I don't know.
over the
I'm
last
just that's a
year,
goal that they've had. I'm
this
not
has
saying
been the
that that's
central focus of the company.
coming anytime soon, but
And we've been
Oh.
working very closely with the FDA to get approval and to launch our first in-human clinical trial in the U.S. hopefully in the next 6 months.
let's keep
Hopefully.
our eye on that.
Hopefully
So
that time you
launch
said.
probably means that. So this makes more sense, I think. So they will probably
So
launch
hopefully
it
this
and
gives you a
start
good
recruiting in
overview
6
of our
months,
product.
and then they'll start working through
For the
this
next
in the next
hour,
few years.
We're going
Which
to
that
go
seems like
through
a more
a
reasonable
deep technical
timeline to me,
dives
given everything that
on
we know.
these topics to tell you about our technical challenges,
Ooh.
share some of our progress, and preview what's coming next. So with that, over to Nir from my team, who's going to talk to you about neural decoding.
I'm interested to see the software side of this.
Hello
Yeah.
everyone. My name is Nir Evan-Chen, and I'm the head of Brain Interfaces Applications. Our goal is to enable someone with paralysis control a computer, as well as me, or even better. We'd like to provide fast and accurate control with all the functionality of computers that works anytime, anywhere. So I'm very excited to show you how we're using the N1 device with our software and algorithms to achieve this. Last year, we shared with you a video of Preshow the monkey controlling
I'm
computer
gonna see if
cursor
I can
with his
pull up
brain.
a similar demo
So how do
to
we
show
do
what
it?
this looks
Just a
like
brief
in
reminder.
humans.
First, we record his neural activity from the motor cortex using the N1 device. We can record from over thousands of channels while he's playing with the joystick. Then we can train a neural net that predicts the cursor velocity from the patterns of his neural activity. With this decoder, he can then control a cursor just by thinking about it.
So
without
this
even
process
moving the
is called
joystick.
population encoding.
We can play with this
and
decoder a variety of
we
games.
made
Also
a
grid
video
task,
in some of
where
our
he's
educational
moving
videos.
the
We go
white
over
dot
how this
towards the
actually
yellow
works.
target. Every time he gets one, he
Pretty
receives a
amazing
drop
that they're
of his
using
favorite
1,000
smoothie.
channels. I'd love to
And he
know
chooses to
where they're
play this game
placed and the
every day.
spatial density of that. That's very cool, though.
Here you can see his performance from early 2021,
All right,
around the
let's see if
time
I
we
can get
released the
some,
previous demo. It's
other
quite accurate,
examples up.
but it's a bit slower than what we would like. And cursor control is the foundation for interacting with most computer applications. So since then, we've been working to improve cursor speed and accuracy. As you can see, it's much, much faster, almost twice as fast. However, it's still a bit slower than what I can do. So we are working on creative ways to improve that.
Seeing if I can play this. I don't think I can.
Now, speed is not enough. You want a full set of functionalities. And for decades, most software was built for mouse and keyboard control. And it doesn't make sense to reinvent this entire ecosystem for brain control, at least for now. So we are working and we are designing mouse and keyboard interfaces for the brain. The way we do that is by training Pager and his friends on a variety of computer tasks, and then designing algorithms to predict their behavior. Here you can see a few examples of tasks in different phases of monkey training. For example, left and right click, click and drag, cursor typing, swipe typing, handwriting, and even hand gestures. Now, interacting with computer is bidirectional, and feedback is very important.
So it's interesting.
I like when I
This
click
is
on a
all
button
research that
and I
we've
can
seen
physically
before,
feel the button being
but
pressed.
the fact that this is all
When a
coming
potential
out of
M1 user will
like
attempt to click, they won't be able to feel
focus
it.
of reason, like it's all coming out of Neuralink
An
specifically,
example of how we are addressing that
is
by
interesting that they've
providing
built on
a
all of that
real-time visual
research and
feedback
that they're doing
that
this
represent the strength
for
of
one
the neural
device.
click by
I
changing the
would
color
love
of
to
the
see a
cursor.
comparison of
Just
the
by typing
accuracy
on a
between
physical
this and
keyboard
then what's
is
been done
much
in humans.
faster and easier than typing on an iPad keyboard. This will make the brain control much faster and easier to use. Typing, one of the most important functionalities. So you already seen this message, and I want to show you the behind the scene of how this message was created. And here you can see again Saki using the virtual keyboard, typing this message. This virtual keyboard is similar to the one I use on my phone. And with the speed and accuracy that we achieved so far, typing on a virtual keyboard is already fast and easy. However, I never use a virtual keyboard when I type on my computer, because it covers my screen, and it's also much slower than what I can do with my 10 fingers. We can do better. For example, a group from Stanford asked a person to imagine handwriting letters. Then they decoded
This
the
is a
letters
great
from
study.
the
Very
screen
cool.
activity.
We did a video on this
Using
as well.
this approach, they were able
So
to
these
speed
are
up
the
typing
Black Rock,
rates.
Utah rays up
We
here.
started this project with our monkeys.
And I'm sure
but
he'll
of
explain
course
this,
we
but
don't know how
imagine
to write.
handwriting, you look at the
So
motor
to mimic
signals
writing,
associated
we
with that,
train Ranger, one
and
of
can
our
actually
favorite monkeys to
then
trace digits on an
type
iPad.
letters
Here
at
you can see
90
him tracing
characters
the
per
digit
minute.
5 and the digit 2.
Um,
Then we recorded his neural activity with
and
the
so that
M1
was in
device.
people that were
But now,
paralyzed.
instead
So
of
this is
decoding
interesting.
the cursor velocity,
Obviously, you
we decode in real
can't have a
time
monkey think
the
about that
digit
without
that he's
training them
tracing on the
first. So
screen.
this is an interesting way to design that
Oh,
experiment.
that's cool. Yeah, I like that they use the. It's just hand tracking.
We had two main takeaways
Yeah.
from this project. One, that monkeys are awesome and can learn very, very complex tasks. The second
So
one,
this was
that
out of
although
the
it
Howard
can
Hughes
increase
Medical
the
Institute
typing
and
rate,
others, the thing that they
it
referenced in
requires
humans.
hundreds of examples
Um,
and samples of each of the digits and the characters we wanted to classify.
So I'm assuming
will
this
not
is the
scale.
brain encoded version, which is very,
The way
very
we are
cool
solving
if
that
that's the case.
is by indirection. Instead of decoding directly the digits, we first decode the hand trajectory of on the screen.
Mhm.
And then, when we decoded the hand trajectory, we can use any off-the-shelf handwriting classifier to predict the digit and the characters. For example, classifiers that are trained on an MNIST dataset.
Yeah.
Why it's so important? It's important because now we can potentially decode any character in any language with only one neural decoder for hand trajectory.
So populations of
means
neurons
that
in
you
the
can
motor
write in
cortex, they don't
English,
necessarily,
Hebrew,
they don't control
Mandarin,
individual
or
muscles,
even
but they
monkey
kind of
language,
say, I
and we
want
can
this
understand you
finger
want
to
a
go in
banana.
this direction.
So
And
there are many challenges
so they're
ahead of
putting
us to improve
electrodes around that
functionality
area,
and speed.
running,
And I want to hand it off to Bliss to talk about the
I
third
wanna
part,
let him
how
finish
we are
this,
making
sorry.
our brain interfaces work anytime, anywhere.
yeah, so neurons prefer different directions, and they can pick that up, and then when they put a lot of these electrodes in
everyone.
target areas
My
around
name
the
is
finger,
Bliss, and I'm a software
they can
engineer here
collect a lot of
at
data,
Neuralink.
do that machine learning that they were
When I
talking
use my
about, and then
computer,
reproduce that in real
my
time.
mouse and
So
keyboard
those numbers
work
that you
how I
saw were
intend
the
them to,
reproductions
at least like
of what the brain
99.999% of the time.
saw, what the Neuralink saw
My
in the brain
goal
when
is to enable a user with
they were
paralysis
doing the task.
to control
Alright,
their
I'll
computer
be quiet.
as reliably as I can. Here's what we want that experience to feel like. In this video, you can see Saki walking over to his MacBook and choosing to work on his typing task. The entire decoding system works out of the box, and it feels totally plug and play.
Keep in mind that
The
this is
first
fully
step to achieving
wireless
this
too.
kind of high reliability
That's
is to
really
test
interesting,
extensively
and that there
offline.
doesn't appear to be a lot of lag as
A
well.
typical flow for using the N1 link
so here they
is
go,
to
they're saying
connect over
Bluetooth.
Bluetooth, stream out neural activity from the brain, and then use that neural activity to train decoders and do real-time inference. We've built a simulation for exactly this sequence, but instead of using a monkey with an implant, we use a simulated brain that injects synthetic neural activity into an implant sitting in a server rack. From the point of view of that implant, it's in a real brain. This simulation runs on every code commit to validate that from the hardware all the way up through to the neural decoders, our entire
Bluetooth really has
stack
gotten
can achieve
amazing, that
state-of-the-art
they can
performance.
get this much
However,
data
while this kind of
across
simulation is great for
assumingly
integration
reliably.
testing of software and hardware,
Because that's been a
I'm
concern with
surprised-
this type of
enough
research
to guarantee
before.
I'm
Is
surprised-
like, is it accurate
in the
enough,
real world.
reliable enough without?
I'm
you know,
surprised
in the real
they're-
world,
they're
the underlying
even
signals we're trying
using
to decode
Bluetooth.
actually change day to day.
I would use.
In this plot, you can see the average firing
Like,
rate.
So
If I
firing
figure
rate
on
just
a
means the
representative
activation
channel
of
of these
neurons,
implants.
how many times they
Each bar
they
represents
send a
one
signal
day,
to other
and you can see that
neurons,
each day has a
which
different average
indicates
firing
what
rate
the
from
person is
previous.
trying to do.
This presents us with a very interesting problem for how to make our decoders robust day to day. It can actually happen that if you train a neural decoder on one day of data and then try to use it on the next,
I
the
wonder
average
how
fire
much
rate can
computing
actually
is
shift
done
enough to
within
cause a bias
the
in
actual
output of the
chip
model.
itself versus
Here on the
being
right, you can see
streamed
that
to
this
something
bias is
else
making it
that
hard for the
computes
cursor
all
to move
of
to the
this
upper right
stuff.
corner.
Because if it is all in the
See it struggling here to make it
then
up to the upper
that
right,
may lower
and then it
latency
moves
for
much
a lot
more
of
effortlessly
things
down
while
to the
getting
bottom
quite a
left.
few signals across.
It
Let's
has
try
to be
many
a
approaches to
lot
mitigate
of
this problem.
onboard
Some examples include building models on
processing.
large
There's
data
no way
sets
they can
of many days of
stream all that data
try to
through
find
Bluetooth
patterns
wirelessly
of
like
neural
that.
activity that are
They must be
stable across
filtering the
days.
signal.
Another
there.
approach we're
Well,
trying
certainly,
is to
yeah.
continuously
And then
sample statistics of
That's
neural
probably
activity on
the
the
neural
implant
network's
and use
processing
the
it
latest
probably on a
estimates
different
to
computer.
pre-process the data
Almost definitely,
before feeding
but,
it into the model.
Um,
This is
I
really an
doubt they're
active area of
getting
research for the
no
team,
packet
and it's a
droppage
critical
with
problem to solve if we want to
Bluetooth
enable someone with
for the amount of
paralysis
data they get
to
out
control
of
their
these
computer
devices.
as well as I can.
yeah.
Unless they're doing a lot of like I said,
Another
on
big problem we have
onboard filtering and
is to
stuff,
minimize the time it
pre-processing.
takes for a spike in the brain to impact the movement of the cursor on the screen. If you have lag or jitter in this control loop, the cursor becomes hard to control, leading to the kinds of overshoots that you can see here on the right.
Still, it's honestly better than I do with an Xbox
One
controller.
big
It's
improvement
pretty
we've
cool.
made towards in this direction is called phase lock. Phase lock aligns the edge of each packet that we send off the implant to the exact moment that the Bluetooth radio is going to wake up. This minimizes the time it takes for a spike in the brain to be incorporated into the prediction of our neural network. Here you can see the latency distribution after phase lock. Not only has the mean been greatly reduced, but the variance has been reduced as well. This makes it easier for the user to predict the behavior of their cursor.
That's very
Over the
impressive.
last year, we've made tremendous improvements to the stability and reliability of our system. And we've been able to demonstrate consistent high performance across many sessions and many months. However, there's still a long road ahead of us before this system will truly feel plug and play.
That's really dizzying. I can't
So
look
if
at that.
solving the
God.
hard
Yeah, oh my
problems required to
God.
ship
Like
this
getting
technology is
nauseous.
exciting to you, you
Cool.
should consider
Very
applying
cool.
to join the team. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Avinash to talk about how our custom low-power ASIC detects spikes in the brain.
So
Yeah, there we go.
ASIC
That's
is
their
a,
ASIC.
Yep. So
Yeah,
that's a specialized board that they've built for this process. So they've made a specific chip.
Hi, I'm Avinash,
That means they're doing a
one
lot
the
of the heavy
engineers on the
lifting
ASIC team.
directly on the chip.
We designed
Which is
the
interesting because
custom
they keep
neural
going back to
sensors,
this
which
idea of a
include both
smartphone in your
analog
brain, and you would
digital
need to do the
circuitry
processing.
to
there.
record and stimulate
So
across
there's a battery in the
1,024
brain. Is that how this is
channels.
working?
We
We'll probably
faced
see it.
challenges
It has
across
to-
all
has to
three
be the
major
case.
metrics.
Interesting.
Or they have
Performance,
inductive. Well, yeah, they have
power,
inductive
and
charging, right?
area.
With the
Not
when
only
Pager
do
went
we have
over,
to
you didn't
fit
see
all
anything on
1024
there.
channels
So it's
into
got
a
to be
single
a
quarter-sized
battery in there
implant,
that
but
is
we
inductively
also have to
charged.
measure spiking activity less than 20 microvolts in amplitude. And today, I'd like to focus on the last challenge I mentioned, power.
So when we're talking
Power
about
consumption
20
is important to
microvolts,
us because we
for
want to give
context,
future users
a AA battery
full
has
day
about
of use of their
25,000
implant
times the
without
voltage
any interruption for charging.
of that. Which is
Back in
kinda crazy, of
2018,
within
we were
that
sending
range.
every sample from every channel off the
So these
device
are
for
small
processing,
signals.
which burned a ton of power. In 2020, we brought spike detection onto the chip. As you may know, neurons transmit information by firing. So simply monitoring for these spikes and only sending these spike events off the implant acts as a very efficient form of compression.
So that's what you're
And
saying,
over the
Colin.
past 2 years, we've
They're
continued to
filtering,
make
looking for just
optimizations
the
within the ASIC,
minimum
dropping
information
the
that they
total
can get to
system
have
power
a certain level
consumption
of accuracy
down to
and
just
sending that over.
32 milliwatts and doubling battery life. Let's take a look at our on-chip spike detection algorithm, which makes our battery-powered implants possible. We first start by applying a 500 hertz
boing,
to 5
boing,
kilohertz
boing.
bandpass filter to remove noise that's out of band. Next, we use an estimate of the noise floor to generate an adaptive threshold per channel. And finally, our spike detector module identifies 3 key points of a spike. Identifying 3 points allows us to detect not just the presence of a spike, but the shape of a spike as well. This can be extremely important for distinguishing between multiple neurons adjacent to a single channel. Today,
So the
I'd like to
electrode
focus on
goes
one
in.
of the
It's
many
not going
optimizations
directly
that we've
into a
made in our
neuron. It's
latest
going
chip.
into intercellular
This one's
space.
specifically
And
cutting system
so
power
this
by
noise is like
15%.
general information that you're getting, like
Note
neural
that
firing,
neurons
and then
spike
they're trying
relatively
to isolate
infrequently,
to what is an
which
actual
means
neuron
that our
right
spike
next to me
detector
firing.
spends a lot of time searching for the first point of a spike and very little time searching for the other 2 points of a spike that only occur after the threshold is crossed. We can use this characteristic of the input waveform to reduce memory accesses within the chip by 30%. Let's take a look at how that works. Our spike detector is implemented as a single functional unit that's shared across all channels with an SRAM to buffer the state of each channel. As a sample comes in, its channel state is read from SRAM, an incremental spike detection step is run, and then the updated state is written back to SRAM. Since this is happening 20 million times per second across the implant, each of these accesses add up quite quickly. In our latest chip, we split the state into 2 parts, a hot state and a cold state. The hot state is accessed on every cycle, while the cold state is only accessed once the threshold is crossed, reducing the average access width and saving power. We're also working on a next generation stimulation-focused chip with 4,096 channels still within the footprint of our current chips. In addition to increasing the channel count, we're also increasing the drive voltage
So they were at
so we can get better
1024
activation
before.
per channel. And to support this higher channel count, as well as a broad range of future applications that you'll soon hear about, we're adding an ARM core onto the chip. And finally, since these chips are the same size as our current chips, we can still put 4 of them together into a single implant for a total of 16,000 channels still within the size of a quarter.
Interesting. So they haven't talked about, they haven't shown any applications where they're using stimulation, but I imagine the first
As
one
you
will
can
be in
see,
those
we've
visual
been working
implants,
very
so
hard
that'll be
to
interesting.
improve the power
Requires a lot of
consumption
power
within
to
the
do that.
implant.
Okay, now
But
they're
we've
going to talk
also
about
been
power.
working very hard to improve the charging experience of the implant, which Matt will talk about. But first, the robot has just completed inserting all 64 threads. So let's take a look.
I'm wondering if there are multiple electrodes on each thread. Is that what we're seeing?
This is a view
Did
of
they
the
say
insertion
that?
site, similar to the one that DJ showed you earlier. But instead of the targeting reticles, if you look closely, you can see that all 64 threads, each carrying 16 electrodes, have been inserted into the brain proxy while avoiding vasculature, and all just within the past 20 minutes.
This
Let's
may be
hand it over to
a
Matt now
Sharina
to
question, but
continue the technical deep dive.
does vasculature in the brain shift ever, or is it sort of set in stone and doesn't move ever?
Hi, I'm Matt.
I think
Head
it
of
mostly
Brain
stays
Interfaces
the
and Electrical
same.
Engineering.
Okay.
But of course,
A
it can
fully
change
implantable
over
analog
time with
device depends on a
neurodegeneration,
battery for
where
continuous
things
operation.
like ventricles
When that
might
battery
get
is running
larger.
low, charging is accomplished through wireless
Interesting.
power transfer.
But there's
However,
also
unlike
a
many
twist to
consumer
this in
electronic
terms of
devices, which can
sleep.
simply offer a
It
physical connector,
creates more
charging a
interstitial
fully
space
implantable
between
device
neurons, which allow
poses
things
several
like
unique
plaques
challenges.
to get removed.
First, the
and
system
things
is
like
operated on
that.
a wide charging
So
volume
it is an area
without
of
relying on
exploration for
magnets for
Alzheimer's
perfect alignment.
disease.
The system must be robust
That's
to
interesting.
disturbance. And complete
Yeah,
quickly,
generally you don't
so
want
as
your
not to be
neurons
overly
moving
burdensome.
around too much. You can have
However, most important is
the appendages
contact
coming
with
off
brain
of the
tissue,
neurons, the
the outer
axons and
surface of the
dendrites moving
implant
around to
must
connect
not
to
rise
others,
more
but
than 2
you don't want
degrees
too much
C.
movement, and the neurons you're born with, for the most part, are the ones that you die with
In pursuit of
in the
these
central
goals,
nervous system
our
of your
charging
brain,
system has gone through several
so that
engineering
vasculature
iterations.
stays
The first,
pretty much the
if you
same,
watched our
unless you have
pig
something like a
demo
tumor
in
or something
August
like
of
that, as far as I
2020,
understand.
Gertrude was implanted
their
with a
inductive
version of the
charging
NMR
right here.
charged with our first generation charger.
Yeah, he's going to talk
This
about the
device
thermal,
was
which is what I was
implemented in a
thinking
small
of. I was
puck
like,
package,
Oh yeah,
and later
true.
separated into a remote coil and battery base.
That's a great
This charger
point.
was challenging to use. However, we learned a lot through its implementation. Our current production charger, which charges our current generation of implants, is implemented in an aluminum battery base, which also includes the drive circuitry. A remote coil, 4 times the size of our original device, also disconnectable.
This is pretty much just how you charge your
has
smartphone with
increased
wireless charging.
switching frequency, driving improved coil coupling.
like. But it does throw off heat,
This charger
which is
is
a
in
very
use today,
interesting point.
including several applications within our engineering and animal test facilities. I'd like to show you one of these applications here with a device we call our simple charger. And the coil has been embedded into the habitat. With the addition of one new outer control loop plus a banana smoothie pump, the troop has been trained to charge themselves.
Oh,
So they just go
that's
under.
cool.
Oh,
Laser
I'm
charges
excited
is
for
the
this. This
Pretty
is giving
cool.
me
Right,
very
we're streaming real-time
Matrix
diagnostics
vibes,
from
but
Pager's N1.
that's
When he climbs up
no way.
and sits below
You
the
like
coil,
plug in.
you can see the charger
That's
activate
crazy.
the
That's
active presence and
so
transition from
cool.
searching to charging. We see the regulated power output on a
This
scale
is
of
like
Oh, why
so
don't-
Matrix vibes, though. Just
and
like
the
plug
current
yourself in and
driven into his battery.
Jeez.
vegetate. That's
He's like,
pretty
is
cool.
it working?
I
I
mentioned
wonder if there's a
earlier that
sensation
we
on
improved the
the
coil
scalp.
coupling. However,
I guess you can sort of imagine somebody
high-quality
going to
factor
sleep,
coils
right, and having the charging port
exhibit
in their
good
pillow.
charging performance over
Yeah.
relatively larger
just
distances, but as they're
snap
brought closer to the implant, what you see is a peak splitting effect, where the best, highest efficiency power transfer is pushed up into higher frequencies outside of the ISM band, required for compliance with regulated radiated emissions. In our next generation charger, we address this problem by the introduction of dynamic tuning, shown on the right. This allows us to, in real time, adjust the resonant frequency of the transmit and receive coils so that we can change their properties just ahead of degraded performance.
I don't really know what that means, I'm going to be honest. But
The electrical
I
engineering team
haven't paid
is
much attention to
currently
electrical
engaged in
engineering.
developing a
But
third
looks
generation
cool.
charger. Notable improvements include bidirectional near-field communication. This has allowed us to reduce the control latency and improve the thermal regulation. Improved thermal regulation results in faster charge times.
And not
And
frying
now
the monkey's brain.
Julian will tell us about how we test the N1.
Preferable, certainly.
Thank you very much, Matt. My name is Julian, and I lead the embedded software group on the Brain Interfaces team. So when we started building implants, we had a small manufacturing line, and to collect data from an implant, you would manually walk over with your laptop, you would connect, and collect the data of interest. But our goal is to make an ultra-safe and ultra-reliable implant. And so to do this, we scaled up the manufacturing line, our testing throughput, and data collection capabilities. So firstly, we added a large suite of acceptance tests to the manufacturing line. These test the functionality of each component and the final assembly. Implants coming off the line are then subjected to benchtop testing, accelerated lifetime, and animal models. We then collect data from these implants round the clock. This data is processed by a series of cloud workers.
This is all pretty standard, but you know, good that this is laid out in this
all
way.
of this information feeds back into our design process and empowers our engineers to answer any question about any implant.
Again, this is
anytime.
probably geared more towards people that they're looking
I'm now going to
to
walk you through different parts
recruit.
of this infrastructure, starting off with firmware testing.
Okay, cool.
So the implant contains a small microprocessor running firmware to manage a whole bunch of its operations. And before we release a firmware update, we want to rigorously test it with both unit and hardware-in-the-loop tests, also known as hill tests. So to do a hill test, what you do is you instrument the battery, you instrument the power rails, the microprocessor, and then we connect to each device. with
Then
a
I
Bluetooth
take
client.
it that a lot of
And
the
then we walk the
manufacturing
devices
is
through
going to
various
be
scenarios
about
to test
various things in
power
power
consumption,
and
real-time
various
performance,
things
security
in,
systems, fault recovery
well,
mechanisms,
determining
a lot of different things.
biocompatibility of electrodes
In
and
our
things
original
like that.
implementation of these
Not
systems,
necessarily
we used off-the-shelf
manufacturing
components to start
things
automating
that
tests
go
quickly.
directly into a brain,
However, these
but to
systems
do
were
many,
constructed
many,
in
many
a relatively
tests.
artisan fashion. and
That
very
makes a lot of
difficult to
sense.
maintain. And this meant that testing
Yeah,
quickly
whenever you
became
put
the bottleneck
something
for development.
into the body in general, there's
to alleviate
a high
this,
chance of
the hardware
rejection,
and software
and so
teams
you,
developed
like
a new
Shrina was
system
saying, you've got
which
to
integrates all the
make
required
compounds or
components
use
onto a single
compounds that
baseboard.
kind of trick the body
We can
into
then
being
put the charger
okay
and
with it
implant
being
hardware on individual modules that plug into
I
this
kind of
baseboard,
forget that they're
including
doing
one
like
board
all of
with
this in their
opposing
own little
coils so that
way,
we can test
whereas
charging
like
performance.
most of brain
This
computer interface
architecture
research is like
allows
building
us
off
to
of itself,
rapidly
and of
iterate
course there
different
is some of
hardware
that, but
prototypes
like
because
that
we can
makes
simply
sense
drop
that
them into this
because this
system
is an
and
entirely
reuse
new
all the
interface, they've
testing
got to
infrastructure.
kind of
Additionally,
reinvent
Keep it
all
close
of
to
those
their
pieces.
chest,
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
They're very, very secretive about this, which I really wish that we had more papers so we could speak more
and that
intelligently
allows
about
us
this.
to test a whole extra layer altogether.
Because I don't want to just
So
take
that's
them
how we
at their word,
generated
you know?
this
But
rather
this does look
incepted
very
image
cool.
here on the right. What you're looking at is spiking activity emitted from some of our simulated neural sensors, streamed through the entire system over Bluetooth, and then displayed on a phone. This allows us to test everything in one system, from chip to cloud.
They're good at making things pretty, that's for
This
sure.
system is 1/5
the
the cost,
showmanship is good.
1/5 the volume, and is very easy to manufacture. This allows
Pretty
every developer to have a
papers get
personal
cited
unit on
more
their desk,
in
and
literature.
it also allows us to test,
Pretty
to
privilege,
shard the
absolutely.
entire test suite over a large number of these units mounted into a rack. All of this has greatly accelerated our rate of development. Let's look next at how we monitor the implant's electronics, the battery, and the enclosure. So the implant will periodically capture all of its vital signs and commit those to flash. And then, upon next connection with one of our recording stations, it will stream that data off.
There's also
So for instance, if
notably
we look at
a better
humidity,
patient
we can
experience
get an understanding
if
of
they
the
know,
integrity of the implant's
at least
enclosure.
to some extent,
And by
what
looking at
goes
battery
into their
voltage and power measurements,
boxes.
we can gauge battery health.
Absolutely.
All of this is done
That's one of the things that I
automatically
care
without
most
any
about with science
intervention, giving us
communication
24/7
is making sure that
visibility into the
people
quality of every single part.
understand what's going
Additionally,
on,
we
how
can use
safe
this
these devices
infrastructure to
are,
request
etc.
high
And
fidelity
so,
information on demand.
yeah, I hope that
so
there's
we can
more
investigate
transparency
different, anomalous situations.
in the future. And like
So
this,
for instance,
this is a
in
good
this particular
start, but
scenario, we were trying to
papers and
track
stuff
down
coming
the
up.
source of some spurious spikes that we were observing on different channels, and so we requested raw wave samples directly from those channels. Capturing good quality neural signals requires intact, low impedance electrodes. And so this is also something we monitor very closely with dedicated circuitry on the neural sensor. So how do we do this? We do this by first using an onboard DAC to play a test tone on a single channel. And then we
seems like they're trying to accomplish some of their
ADCs
filtering
simultaneously.
in the
We
electrodes
record,
as opposed to
the response
even
signal
in
with
that
channel and physically adjacent
ASIC
channels.
processor that
Not
they're
only
talking
can we
about.
measure the impedance of every channel with this, but we can also map different physical phenomena to different characteristic signatures. So for instance, an open channel will appear as a very large response on the channel, and shorter channels will appear as a large response on neighboring channels. By looking at the purity of the signal coming back, we can also validate that the analog front end of the neural sensor itself is operational. In our original implementation of doing these impedance scans, it took 4 hours to get through all 1,000 channels. But by parallelizing the tests, downsampling, filtering, and then reducing the amount of information we have to stream off the device by moving a lot of the calculation to the firmware side, we're now able to scan all 1,000 channels in just 20 seconds.
I do wonder, though, about
This means that we
artifacts
can run
such as
impedance
if
on
the
every
monkey
implant
is running
every
around.
day.
So this is a
Internal
constant
dashboards
problem,
can
it
come back
seems,
in
in the
stream
brain-computer interface world,
so that we can
where
get
if a
really
person or an
quantitative
animal
insight
is staying
into that
still,
interface
or if
between
they're head
biology
fixed,
and
then
electronics.
the integrity of the signals is relatively good.
Now
But
you
if
have an
the
idea about
animal
how
is,
we
say,
test and
jumping
monitor
as
our
they
signals.
want to say
I'm gonna hand it off to
something,
Josh, who's gonna tell you about
then,
making feedback
well,
even faster
the
and
neural
accelerating
signal
our
is
implant
changed by that jump. So the removal of artifacts, it will be interesting to see someday a demonstration where there is an animal in motion rather than sitting at a computer.
Yeah.
And I'm an engineer on the
This
brain
is
interface
especially
system.
important when thinking about the
We're
visual
responsible for
elements
the
of the
implant
visual
system design,
implant,
as well as
because
manage the
people want to
manufacturing
be able
and
to
testing
see if they're
process.
running around.
Julian just talked to you a little bit about some of the ways in which we test our implant electronics hardware and software.
Yeah, they showed that a little bit with the pig and even Pager moving freely, or the monkeys moving freely. But, you know, again, I'd like to see that data. I want to get my hands on it. I want to read the paper to know what it's actually translating to. But at least from this, it looks like they have a reasonable level
failure
of
modes at scale to
artifact
rapidly
reduction.
increase our pace of iteration. Even better, the system also significantly reduces the amount of tests which require animal models, both for implant prototypes and, of course, longevity testing. So how does the system work? Well, at a very basic level, it comes down to 3 things. First, we want to mimic the internal chemistry of tissue. Next, we want to accelerate these chemical interactions as well as diffusion with our implant materials. And finally, we want to aggressively cycle the internal electronics of our implant. With these things, primarily the first 2, we have achieved a conservative 4x acceleration factor by the Arrhenius relationship. In other words, every day our implants spend in our accelerated system is equivalent to at least 4 days spent in vivo. Historically, one of our greatest challenges has been the battle against moisture ingress into our implants. So we continuously monitor the internal humidity to watch for abnormal rise. Here, in white, you can see some internal humidity data from implants in some of our animals for the duration of over 1 year. As you can see, our internal humidity sensing is so sensitive, it can even detect the very small and slow humidity rise just from diffusion through our implant materials. Now, in blue, you can see that same internal humidity data, but from devices in our accelerated system. Now, if we adjust this data for our acceleration factor, you can begin to see not only the agreement in this data, but also just how far into the future this data extends. Now, in red, you can see a device which has failed in our accelerated system. This device showed an abnormal increase in humidity over the duration of many months before implant electronic failures.
Did they say that these were
occurred.
simulations, or was this actual
So how
data
did we build
collected?
this system?
I think it's simulated. I
Well, we
believe.
started building the first system prototype just after the COVID shutdown had begun in early 2020. So we had to get a little creative. As you can see, our first system prototype was a little scrappy and operated out of one of our apartments, as indicated by the carpeting. Although scrappy, the system allowed us the fastest path to start testing our devices, tuning our working fluid chemistry, and checking our constraints. We also immediately started root causing observed failures in early implant prototypes, fed that information into the next prototype designs, and literally rinsed and repeated. Over the duration of just a few months, the system was built out totally custom and highly iterated with 2 system versions and countless minor iterations, leading us to our currently operated 3rd generation system, which achieves high density testing with automatic in-vessel charging as well as automatic data collection. The system also features an implant sled assembly, which accepts brain proxy material such that the implant can be installed and inserted by the surgical robot, just like you saw a few minutes ago. We also integrated the system into a high-density rack mount form factor, along with a centralized fluid management
this is
system,
pretty good
both
to
for
see as
chemical
well.
uniformity across vessels and also
Just
reduced
to
operational
show
maintenance. The system has been
to
in
show more
operation for
transparency
the last
into
year and a
how
half
they're testing the
and has had
devices,
its fair
and
share
at
of
the very least
challenges.
that they've thought about this.
Since the system itself
Again,
is
I
undergoing
want to
the
see
same
paper, but
accelerated abuse
until that,
as the implants within it, it has
it's
been
good to
extremely
see that they
challenging
have
to design,
looked at all of
build,
these different
and
elements and are
maintain a
showing this
system
to
of
us,
this
because
scale
I think
while keeping
that
it robust,
like
even against itself.
overall, like this isn't all
what
that
comes
exciting,
next?
especially where we just saw the other things.
Well, we've
but
started
it's-
work on our 4th
it's
generation
important.
system and have totally redesigned it from the
if
ground
you're
up
gonna get a brain
to be a
implant, you wanna
hot
make sure that
swappable
it's
single implant per
working
vessel
and well
design,
tested, so
partly
it's good to see that
inspired
they
by
have this
high
system.
density compute servers. With this new system, we will achieve a whole new level of density, robustness, and scale. We also intend to have many of these systems operational in the pursuit of capturing even the lowest frequency edge case failure modes. With this, we will have thousands of implants testing.
It's inspiring too, because I think a lot of people, they're inspired by the things NASA does because they can see the process of discovery happening and they can see the machines in action. But people in biomedical technologies, they
there is
often
still a lot left to do.
So this is an
There are also many exciting challenges ahead of us, such as introducing
Yeah,
mechanical
definitely.
stressing,
And again,
brain proxy micromotion, and even
the
replicating
emphasis
tissue growth
on
around
the
threads
scale of
for more
production that they're
complete
already
and
planning for
representative
is
accelerated
really
testing.
interesting to me,
So now that
because
you've heard
as we've talked
some of the
about,
ways in which we rigorously
you know,
test our implant designs before production
the processes are slow,
Christine is now
and
gonna
you
take
want to
you
make
through
sure
a
that it's
detailed
safe,
look
and so
at
they're
our
really
surgical
making a
process.
lot of investment and banking on that their device is safe, because if they've spent all this money
Thanks,
to
Josh.
build out this
everyone.
this hardware
I'm
to test
Christine,
this and
lead
the
of the
capacity to
surgery
build these
engineering
specific devices, and it doesn't work or it poses
To
a
get
problem,
an N1 device, it's
like,
essentially these steps.
that's a big
Targeting
issue,
and the incision.
and so
Drill the craniectomy.
they must really believe in
remove the tough outer
the safety of
meningeal layer
this.
called the dura.
So
Then
it'd be
insert the
interesting to see
thin,
what their safety
flexible
data
threads
is.
of electrodes. Place the implant into the hole we
But
created.
the infrastructure
and then
too,
that's it.
it's
So you've got an implant
useful
under the skin.
because
Look,
if
Ma,
we think
no
about
wires.
biological things
Just
in
kidding.
general, then there's usually some sort
I mean, seriously, no
of
wires, but I don't actually have
redundancy or backup systems built into place. So you can imagine that if a few of their machines, maybe even a fourth of their machines is shut down because of some sort of problem in their system or bug, then they're still able to continue their processes. But if there was a certain machine that just was not working, then they wouldn't be stalled by that. So it does seem to be a roadblock clearer.
So we have.
Hey, we've got a request to pull the audio up.
I just saw that.
To call it Tiny Dancer, but it's called R1, which is also great. The rest of the surgery is done by the neurosurgeon. In order for us to make a accessible and affordable procedure, we need to revisit this. I'll tell you why. When I was in school, my dad lost the ability to walk and to use his arms.
Hopefully that helps.
And even to speak. He was diagnosed with ALS. We would look on the internet and you could see maybe one person here or there who had some cool custom robotic assistive device, but it was deeply frustrating how limited were the options available to him. And there's hundreds of thousands of people with paresis, not even counting people with other conditions that our device might be able to help. Meanwhile, there's not that many neurosurgeons, maybe about 10 per million people. And it takes about a decade or more to train a neurosurgeon, and they're already generally very busy. And as you can imagine, their time is very expensive. So in order for us to do the most good and have an affordable and accessible procedure, we need to figure out how one neurosurgeon could oversee many procedures at the same time. This might sound sort of crazy, but probably so did laser eye surgery before LASIK made it normal. LASIK's been around for about 30 years and counting. In the beginning, the laser robot did just the most fundamental core part that it had to do, and the surgeon did the rest. And over the iterations, the surgeon has to do less and less, and the laser robot does most of it. And it's a highly compelling procedure, takes just a handful of minutes, and often gives life-changing results. Since I joined in 2017, we've also done a handful of iterations to optimize the thread insertions of the robot.
The level of thought around the whole ecosystem
One of
how
the
this will be
challenges that
deployed
we've had to face
is quite
has
interesting.
to do with the
Because
optomechanical
again,
packaging.
if we're talking about having this
So
in two people,
as you can see here,
what's the
there's
point of having a
about
robot that
three
can mass
primary
scale
optical
this?
paths that are really valuable for us to have reliable thread insertions. One is the visible imaging of the needle inserting the thread. And then another is the laser interferometry system called OCT, optical coherence tomography, that gives us the precise position of the brain while it's moving in real time. And then also we have to provide lighting and illumination to see what's going on in the visible camera. And where the needle is at the bottom of the craniectomy, especially when it's close to the skull wall, can be pretty difficult to fit everything and be able to see it. So the way that the team solved this is by putting all three of these optical paths into one optical stack using photon magic or polarization, whatever you want to call it. And that enables us to do vessel avoidance in real time. So as I mentioned, the brain is moving, and where we place targets in the beginning may not be where you want to insert at the moment the needle is going down there. So the robot can actually detect the vessels and then determine if we're going to insert onto a vessel or not, if it's safe to insert, and then that way we can avoid inserting onto major vessels. And that brings us to the robot that we have here today. There's still a lot for us to do to get to that procedure where we reduce the role of the neurosurgeon and make it affordable and accessible. The two elements of the surgery that demand the most skills from the neurosurgeon are the craniectomy and the directomy. Alex and Sam are going to tell you a bit about the directomy step.
Oops, sorry. So the craniectomy is the removal of the skull, and then the directomy, there's this leather material that is called the dura that sits on top of the brain. And you have to remove that, so that's what they're talking about.
On their skill in order to accommodate the variability patient to patient in skull thickness, skull hardness. Even within the same patient, in the same craniectomy, you can have different skull thicknesses, for example. In addition, if we can make something that has a very high precision craniectomy, we can open the design space for future ways of mounting the implant to the skull. So I'll show you a few of our prototypes. Ultrasonic cutters, like what's on the screen, and oscillating cutters have the benefit of not cutting soft tissue. You can cut the bone and not the brain. But however, as you can see here, our ultrasonic cutter prototype created quite a bit of heat to cut at the rate that we wanted. So onto the oscillating saw. Here, we designed a blade to minimize cut time and also conducted sound and also heating. And as you can see, you can cut through hard things like bone, but not soft things like skin. It's simple and it works. However, if you wanted to cut an arbitrary depth or arbitrary shape.
So this is what's used more standardly. I don't know if that's a word, but.
I was afraid no one would get it. You guys are smart. So there's a time-tested solution for drilling arbitrary shapes, which is a CNC drill. The challenge with us doing this on a person is that we need to make sure it cuts reliably every single time, doesn't cut too deep. And a few ways that we're using feedback to make sure we don't cut through the brain are force feedback and also impedance. And if I could get a volunteer, no, just kidding. Maybe next time. But yeah, so this is some insight into some of the things we're working on to make an accessible and affordable procedure. And now Alex is going to tell you a bit about our next generation developments.
Thanks, Christine. I'm Alex. I'm a mechanical engineer here on the robotics team. Now that we've covered the technology and surgical process for our current device, we'd like to cover some of our next generation development projects. I and the next couple speakers would like to talk about one of those projects, which is enabling device upgradability. You've gotten to hear about the advancements we've made over the past year. We've improved implant robustness, battery and charging performance, Bluetooth usability. Realistically, every new device version is going to be significantly better. It'll be more functional, it'll last longer. We need to keep this new technology accessible for our early adopters. This means that we need a solution.
I'm really, really glad that they're thinking about this, because this is an important ethical question, so it's good to see.
As many medical device companies have found, this is a challenging problem. The body's healing response doesn't make this easy, so this isn't solved yet. But we've made significant progress towards enabling this that we'd like to cover today. Now, we'll have to start with some background as to what makes device upgrade challenging. And we'll start with the anatomy. Under the skin, you have the skull. Below that, the dura, a tough membrane that separates the bone from the brain. And between the dura and the brain, you have the pia arachnoid complex, a fluid-filled suspension for the brain. To install the device, the surgeon removes a disc of skull and dura to expose
Did
the
they
brain
say
surface.
which part of the brain that they're measuring from? Because it looks
The device then
like
replaces
it's
the removed
going
material.
to be from the
The
parietal
challenge
lobe,
is here at this interface.
parietal
Over
cortex.
months, all empty
They didn't
volume
mention, I
is
don't
filled
think.
by tissue, encapsulating the device.
I think from that area, it looks like it could still
The
be
device would be trivially easy to
motor
remove.
cortex there, from what they were
Because
showing
of the
in there.
thread's small size,
I would guess that
it
based
would
on
slip
what
right
they're
out of the
shooting
brain.
for.
It's the tissue
in
layer
terms
that
of
forms
applications.
above the surface that
And I'm
makes the
thinking
removal
about
challenging.
the array shape
We built
in terms
tools
of whether
in-house
it's
to
going
study
to
this
be a
response and
circular
characterize it,
thing,
such
or
as
if
histology
it
and
is going to
In
be
these images,
anything
you can
else.
see that layer of tissue that has formed above the surface,
Sorry, say that again?
encapsulating the threads and adhering to the surrounding
The array shape.
We've explored
Oh,
many
of the actual
different
electrodes?
avenues for designing around this
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
and finding a solution to make
Is it going to look like BlackRock system almost, or is it?
Well, it's
it going to look
individual
like-
electrodes. It's individual threads.
less invasive?
So I think that they might be
Instead of
single
directly
or
exposing the brain
like
surface,
3 or 4 electrodes
instead,
sitting together on a
Keep
string.
the dura in place, maintaining the body's
So it seems
natural
that there are
protective
electrodes
barrier.
being surgically implanted, and then there is a battery thing that is placed above that.
Right, so that's what that threading thing is doing. It's implanting the electrodes, and then all of those electrodes are on strings or on wires that connect to this thing mounted in the skull, so that the brain can move freely
As you can see
with
in these SEM images,
these
most of
attachments.
a dense network
I wonder if
called
there's an
Spinal.
issue, if there's any concern of infection or damage with the dura being removed, because I don't see how it could come back
One
in,
of those
but
challenges is
we'll
imaging through
address
the
that
dura.
later.
As you can see on the left, our current custom optical systems offer pretty incredible capabilities for imaging the
I
exposed
haven't
brain
noticed
surface.
dura removal being an issue in any surgeries that I've done.
Oh, okay. I do not know, so I appreciate that.
The dura is in the way.
So long as
There's
the
simply
whole
too
thing
much
is done with
attenuation.
aseptic technique.
To solve this
I mean in terms of not
we
having
developed a
it
new
to,
that uses medical
like, not
sensors
replacing it.
to image
Is that okay?
underneath the tissue.
That's okay?
Here,
Yep.
you can see that dye perfusing through the vessels highlighting them. There's still a lot of work, engineering work to go to prove accuracy and repeatability of this system. But once that's done, this will allow us to target and avoid blood vessels underneath the dura. We're also exploring applying our laser imaging system to deeper tissue structures. In the bottom left, you can see a section of the tissue layers underneath the dura. This image is compiled from multiple volumes from our optical coherence tomography system. You can see the collage of those volumes above. In the future, these new systems, when combined with correlation to pre-op imaging, such as MRI, will enable precise targeting without directly exposing the brain surface. Now, imaging isn't the only challenge that comes with the tough dural anatomy. Now, I'd like to hand it over to Sam to talk about some of the challenges of inserting our electrodes through this membrane.
Sorry, I'm trying to keep on top of the volume, guys. Hopefully it's okay.
I'm Sam, and I lead the needle manufacturing and design team. So, as Alex mentioned, the same properties of the dura that make it a good protector of the brain also make it really difficult for us to insert the threads into. In humans, the dura can be over 1 millimeter in thickness, which doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to our 40-micron needles, it actually is a lot. For example, if you scaled up the needles to the size of a pencil, the dura would scale to over 4 inches in thickness. Take a look at how far you have to zoom in to even see it. By the time the features of the needle come into frame, you could see individual red blood cells in the same frame. This is just wait. This is a real-life SEM image of our latest design. On the left there, you can see the end of the thread. In the middle is the needle, and on the right is actually a piece of my hair. So yeah, it's extremely small. And besides being really small, there's a lot of other challenges associated with designing this. One challenge is that we have to use the needle and the...
So it looks like it is a single electrode on that
to grab onto the thread
string there.
And hold it while we peel it from this protective silicon backing. And then we have to keep holding it while we bring it over to the surface and then release it from the cannula during insertions. Another challenge is that the brain is really soft beneath the tough dura. And so if the needle isn't sharp enough, it'll just keep dimpling the surface without puncturing. And if this free length gets too long, it can actually just buckle the needle like this. Another challenge is that we don't just have to get the needle through, we have to get the thread through as well. So we really have to focus on optimizing the combined profile of the needle and thread together. And these are just some of the challenges associated with designing something like this. And so far we found that the key to solving this problem has been improving on our speed of iteration. But let's look at how we make these things in the first place. So we start with a length of 40 micron wire made out of tungsten and alloyed with a little bit of rhenium for added ductility. We designed this femtosecond laser mill in-house to cut the features of the needle and cannula. And it can do this with sub-micron precision. We spent a lot of time this year turning this thing from a science project into an industrial system. Just a couple months ago, it took a skilled operator 22 minutes to make a needle. And even a skilled operator could only get about 58% yield. Today, that same process takes just 6 minutes, and anyone can get 91% yield with just a few minutes of training. With only one click, the mill cuts and measures the needle and cannula and uploads the measurements to our limb system so that the robots can use the exact dimensions for each needle that it uses. Now, this is all for our current design, though, and we've had a couple years to optimize the manufacturing process of it. The current design has served us well so far, but it doesn't quite protect the thread well enough to get through the tough dura. So, like I said, we had to come up with something new, and we needed to be able to iterate on designs quickly. Unsurprisingly, there's no page in machinery's handbook for this kind of thing, so we dug into the science of femtosecond laser ablation and figured out a workflow that allows us to use our laser mill much like a CNC mill. This allows us to iterate several times. This allows us to iterate in under an hour for new designs, allowing several iterations per day when we're really on a roll. As a result, the latest design, seen on the right, can actually insert through 9 layers of dura, totaling 3 millimeters on the benchtop. This is far more than we could ever expect in a human with significant margin.
This is really good because if someone happened to have some sort of condition that thickened their dura, then they would be able to account for that and to take care of that.
On that as well. And we do this by having our microfabrication process here in-house. This summer, we completely rebuilt our clean room in about 9 weeks, which, among other things, greatly reduced particulate counts, which allows yield and throughput to greatly increase. This, combined with all the other great improvements the microfab team has made, allows us to iterate on new designs in just a matter of days. The last piece of the puzzle, though, is testing. We can come up with as many new designs as we want, but unless we have a way to actually test them in the right conditions, we won't know what to tweak. Or even worse, we'll spend time optimizing for the wrong things.
Did they mention how deep these electrodes are penetrating, where they're placed?
Through the dura. But when we took the proxies and put them in our micro CT imaging, we realized that our hold on the end of the threads was actually too strong, and we were pulling them out just a little bit underneath the surface. By the time we solved the problem, we realized that this issue was very sensitive to the properties of the surrounding material or tissue. We could make a proxy where this never happens, and we could make another proxy where this happened every single time. And this highlights why it's crucial that we spend time making our benchtop tests match tissue as accurately as possible. And I'm going to pass it off to Leslie now, who's going to talk about how we've been doing that. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Leslie, and I lead microfabrication R&D. And part of what we're interested in is understanding the biological environment our implant and threads experience once they're fully installed in the body. Learning directly from biology, though, is inherently slow. So in order to move fast, we're developing synthetic materials that mimic the biological environment. This allows us to learn as much as we can on benchtop and start taking steps away from the industry standard of animal testing. Developing accurate proxies, though, is challenging. The implant environment is made up of many anatomical layers that all have unique properties. And as time goes on and the implant site heals, new tissue forms, filling any available space. In addition to that, motion related to cardiovascular activity and head movement introduce added complexity. So to start addressing—
Yeah, this is always a huge problem that you're dealing with building any type of biomedical device that's going into the body.
This may involve mechanical characterization of tissue or analysis of interactions at thread-tissue interfaces. Much of this characterization is even done during surgery itself by using custom hardware and software that modifies our surgical robot to double up as a sensitive characterization tool. We then use the data collected and feed it back into optimizing our materials so that they behave mechanically, chemically, and as shown here, structurally, just like biology. We've come a long way from our humble first brain proxy, shown here sitting on a plate and consisting of agar and a parafilm sheet. And while simple, it allowed us to perfect robot insertions through countless benchtop tests. Today, our proxy is slightly more complex, where we've upgraded to a composite hydrogel-based brain proxy that better mimics the modulus of real human brain.
This is
We've
what I
also
call moving the
incorporated
needle
a dura
on
proxy
the problem.
and developed
Because even
an
if
injectable
only parts
soft
of
tissue
this
proxy that so
problem
far has
are solved
allowed
by
us
the
to
implants
perform
themselves, quite a few other problems are solved by the machines and the surgical robots.
proxy of the future, but some of those items include a surgery proxy with integrated soft tissue, brain, bone, skin, or even a whole body, a brain proxy that simulates motion, vasculature, and electrophysiological activity, and a biological proxy to test biocompatibility and electrical stimulation. There's a ton of
Sorry for the audio adjustments. Didn't someone ask about a brain in a petri dish earlier? Here you've got a answer of how it can be used for testing.
Where we learn more and iterate faster on benchtop and reduce our reliance on animal models, or even one day replace them completely. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dan, who will be presenting a very exciting next generation application. Thank you.
Handing it off to lots of people.
No, damn.
Thank you, Leslie. My name's Dan, and I came to work
I'm
at
really
Neuralink
glad,
after
though, that
following
it's
a
not just
career
Elon Musk
in
who is
visual
talking about this,
neuroscience
but
research.
various people on the Neuralink team, so
inspired
that people
to
get a
join this
sense of who
company
they
because I
might be
saw
working
in our
with,
device
and that there are all kinds of people, scientists, engineers, and the level of thought that they've had behind it, but also that they appear from behind the curtain and have some sort of interaction with the general public here.
Firstly, as well as being able to record from every channel, we can stimulate neural activity in the brain by injecting current through every channel. This is important because it allows us to bypass the eye and generate a visual image in the brain directly. Secondly, our device can
One
have
thing that I want to
almost
point to
another
that's really important is that they just said that they
For a
can
visual
stimulate through
prosthesis,
every
this is
channel.
important because the more
That's important because a lot of neural
have,
interfaces
the higher
will,
density
you will
of
stimulate
image
over
created
multiple
in
at the
the
same
brain.
time, especially when we're talking about such
Thirdly,
high densities
thanks
of
to our
electrodes,
robot,
because it just requires
we
so
can
much
insert these
more
electrodes
infrastructure
deeply
to
into the
like do
brain.
individual ones rather
Now, this
than
is
like
an
do
important
these 10, do those
thing
20.
for a
So
visual
that's
prosthesis,
important
because the human
to
visual
have
cortex
the
is buried
specificity
deeply
that
in
you'd
a
need
fold
for
in the
a
medial
visual
face of the
prosthetic.
brain called the calcarine sulcus. In this image, I've highlighted the calcarine sulcus in red in an MRI. It contains a map of the visual world, the visual field. It's about a surface area equal to a credit card on each side. And if you unfold it and flatten it, you see that the image is inverted, it's upside down. But more interestingly, it's distorted so that the central part of the visual field, the fixation point, is greatly magnified. So for example, if you look at this image of Lincoln, if you look directly into his right eye, everything to the left of that fixation point is directed to your right visual cortex, and everything to the right goes to your left visual cortex. His eye, even though
You
it's
may
very
wonder
small
why
in the image, is
there
magnified
is
in
this
the brain
inversion,
to occupy
and the
nearly
reason
a
why
quarter
is
of the
because
surface
of
area of the
the
visual cortex.
lens properties of the eye. So it's an optical
last
thing where there's a
half century,
projection
Visual neuroscientists
because of the
have
lens.
developed a profound understanding of visual processing in the brain. What's driven most of this research is recording from single cells in the cortex, usually of macaque monkeys. One of the seminal discoveries was that every cell in the visual cortex represents only a tiny part of the visual field. Your perception is made up of a mosaic of tiny receptive fields, each belonging to a single cell in your visual cortex. So if you record from one of these cells in a monkey, say in this location, you can find a very tiny region of the screen where a light stimulus will cause modulation of that neuron. Another location in visual cortex will have a location elsewhere on the screen, in this case in the lower visual field. These regions are called receptive fields. We've inserted our device into the visual cortex of 2 rhesus monkeys, whose names are Code and Dash.
I love that they're always
means
giving
we
us
can
the monkey
record
names. I love that.
From their visual cortex generated by their normal home environment as they roam around. But as we all know, monkeys love banana smoothie. That means we can easily teach them to fixate points on a screen and reward them. We can reward them very precisely because we can track the location of their eye using an infrared camera. One of the things this allows us to do is to plot the receptive fields for every neuron that we can record with a single device. Now we do this by showing the animal a movie of random checkerboards whilst he fixates steadily on the screen. Then we take only the frames of the movie that generated a response in the cell and average them all together. This is a technique known as reverse correlation. It's generally used quite widely in visual neuroscience for this purpose. And this is an example of a receptive field plotted with this technique. The central cross is the fixation point, and you can see the little red and blue regions of excitatory and inhibitory receptive field. These regions give cortical cells some of their characteristic properties. So we can record all.
So notice how the inhibitory areas and excitatory areas are right next to each other and often mirror each other in size. So an important way that we see and experience vision is in opponency, so seeing the contrast and difference between 2 areas. So that's just a little neuroscience tidbit.
With this preliminary device. Many of the receptive fields are close to the fovea, close to the fixation point. That's partly due to the magnification that I talked about of the fovea. But there's also a scattering of fields in the periphery. These are from recording sites deeper in the brain in the calcarine sulcus. So far, I've only talked about recording information from the cortex. But to produce a visual prosthesis, we need to stimulate. So if we stimulated the cells whose receptive fields are in this location, we would produce a perception of a flash in that location that only the monkey can see. How do we know that the monkey sees it? How do we know what it looks like? Well, unfortunately, we can't ask them what they see, but we can train them.
Visual flashes
tell
that
us something
only the
about
monkey
that
can see, those
phosphene.
are called phosphenes.
We start by training
People
the monkey
see them
to
too.
fixate a
For
central
example, if they close their
point
eyes
on the
and
screen,
push
like
on
this white dot.
their
And we start by presenting real
eyelids
visual
sometimes.
stimuli on the screen and rewarding the
And
monkey.
there's
for making
actually
eye movements
been
toward those
human
stimuli.
research too
So
with
here we flash a white dot,
stimulation of
and the monkey
phosphenes
makes an
into
eye
visual
movement towards it,
cortex,
symbolized by the
usually
green
using
arrow.
implantable
We then
utile
choose
arrays,
another
but also
random location
non-invasive tech as
and
well.
reward the monkey for making an eye movement towards it. Once he's got good at this task, we can begin to interleave these real stimuli with electrical stimulation of electrodes and produce a phosphene. The monkey sees the flash and naturally makes a saccade towards it. This
So
tells
that's
us not
cool.
only
So
where
if, in case you missed that, so they're projecting images into their visual field through stimulation, and they know that the monkey sees it because they watch the eyes move to the direction where that would be. So that's how they're validating that the monkey has seen it.
Let's look at code performing this task. I want to show you first at 1/4 speed. There's a visual flash, and he makes an eye movement towards it. The monkey can only see what is white on this screen. He can't see his own eye movement, and he certainly can't see when we stimulate. But here we stimulate, and he makes the same saccade to the same location because we stimulated the same electrode. Nothing appears on the screen at that time, and he has no other cue to make that eye movement. Let me show you this in real time. You can see monkeys like to work very quickly. And when we stimulate, he makes that saccade in real time. And looks like he's had enough. So what I've shown you is a way to produce a phosphene in the visual field. This is not something new in visual neuroscience. But if you think about that phosphene as a single pixel in a visual image, all we need to do is scale up and produce a great many more pixels and have them covering the visual field. This is a schematic of what a visual prosthesis using our N1 device might look like. A camera, the output from a camera would be processed by an iPhone, for example, which would then stream the data to the device, and the image would be converted into a pattern of stimulation of the electrodes into visual cortex. With 1,000 electrodes, we might be able to produce an image resembling something that you see there on the right. But as Avinash told you, our next generation of the device will have 16,000 electrodes. If you put a device on both sides of your visual cortex,
I missed them saying that earlier. That's a lot. Also, the highest resolution that I've seen was, I think, 100 electrodes for a visual prosthesis. I may be wrong on that, though. Now that I'm saying it, I feel like they've probably used a couple. But this is pretty significant.
Thanks very much. I'll pass you over to Joey, who's now going to talk about another very exciting application of our device.
Thank you, Dan. So my name is Joey. I'm a neuroengineer, and I'm the head for the next-gen team at Neuralink. So for persons with spinal cord injury, the connection between the brain and the body is severed. The brain continues functioning normally, but it's unable to communicate with the outside world. You've already heard about how we can use the N1 link as a communication prosthesis to help someone with spinal cord injury control a computer or a phone, but it can also be used to reanimate the body. Let me show you how. First, a little neuroanatomy. Movement intentions arise in motor cortex and are sent down long nerve fibers through the spinal cord. These are upper motor neurons. In the spinal cord, they synapse, That is, make a connection with another motor neuron, a lower motor neuron, which sends these movement intentions to the muscles, which contract, and in turn you have movement. While of course there are many other circuits involved in voluntary movement, you can think about the spinal cord as many pairs of these two connections. And in spinal cord injury, one of these connections is severed, unable to make the muscles contract. Let's zoom a little bit further. So here you can see on the left a cross-section of the spinal cord with a fiber coming down schematically. This travels through the white matter tracts. This is the upper motor neuron. And then it synapses.
There was some really cool research done where they severed a cat's spinal cord, and they used a brain-computer interface to pull those signals and do pretty much what they're talking about here, and stimulate the legs to actually move. And it's cool because the spinal cord is what's coordinating what muscles actually get you to move. So you can sort of give it a clock, like a certain beat, and then the legs will just kind of walk to that beat and in the direction that you're giving it. So the information coming down from the brain is actually quite simple. The spinal cord is coordinating it anyway.
We could stimulate those neurons, activate
motor
them,
circuits
and in
are
turn
so
causing the muscle
cool.
to
I think that the
contract
pattern
and movement to
generator
occur.
is very interesting.
But this is very hard to do.
The way
The
that it
spinal cord is
stops
quite
is also
delicate,
somewhat
and it moves
interesting.
significantly within
It's
the
also
spinal
interesting
cord.
that a decorticated cat, so a cat that doesn't even have a cortex at all, can walk on a treadmill. There were experiments done in the 70s about that, and that just kind of blew my mind. Not that I was around in the 70s, but still.
So we have done just that. Here you can see a view from the R1 robot. It's a targeting view, and we've placed electrodes across many millimeters of the spinal cord. And the R1 robot is able to insert those electrodes deep into the ventral horn, into motor pools, in very close proximity to lower motor neurons. This is important because it allows them to have a localized connection to those neurons and activate very precise movements. Now, to track movement, it's very common to use motion capture markers, like you might see in the production of a movie. These can be placed with a light adhesive, and you can see me placing these on my hand.
This is kind of cool.
We're going to use these
there are
markers to let us
reflective
zoom in on movement
spheres
in the next
as
couple of slides.
fiduciary markers or fiducials.
So here's a pig walking on a treadmill, and you may have seen something like this before in a previous.
So here's the
presentation.
spatial computing.
But unlike before, this pig has more than one Neuralink device. There's a device in the brain, but there's also one in the spinal cord.
Yeah, so what they're going to be comparing is they have the actual motion generated from what we just saw, the computer vision, those little balls, the indicators, and they're going to compare that to what their system could predict based on the neural activity that happened at that time. So that's
this
what
is super cool, but that's actually not what we want to do. We want to go in the other direction. We would like to stimulate the spinal cord and cause movement to occur. Okay, so let's do that. So here's a pig, a happy and healthy pig doing what pigs like to do, which is root around for food and snacks. And as you'll see on the floor, there's a blue square. This is a voluntary engagement zone where the pig places itself, indicating that it's comfortable to receive stimulation. When it's in the zone, we stimulate, and if the pig leaves the zone, we'll stop stimulating. And as before, you can see we're able to track the position of the joints and also stream neural data as well. Okay, so let's stimulate on an electrode. So here's one electrode on one thread that when we stimulate causes a flexion movement of the leg. So on the left, you can see the movement of the joints, and you can also see the time series of the stimulation pattern in yellow. So the leg is moving up. Here's another electrode, which when we stimulate causes an extensor movement. This is actually a little harder to see because the leg is straightening and the hips are shifting, but if you look carefully, you can see how the leg is moving. We can stimulate on a great variety of threads and produce different movements and actually sequence them spatial temporally to provide patterns. So on the left, you can see a time series of different stimulation on different electrodes. You can see the movements of the joints. And on the right, we're zooming in on muscle activity that gives us an idea of the kind of strength and power and
so
specificity
I missed,
of
is
those.
this peripheral? Like, is this in the spinal cord, or is this in the motor area?
So it looks like what they're doing is they're taking a Neuralink device to collect motor signals in motor cortex in the brain, and then sending that to a stimulator placed in the spinal cord. So if you cut the spinal cord, you can get around it,
part.
The stimulatory part is in the spinal cord specifically.
More peripheral.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, still central nervous system, but yes.
Right.
You heard about placed in motor cortex. How would that work? So we place threads in motor cortex and record spikes. These spikes would be wirelessly transmitted in real time and decoded into patterns of stimulation.
Spikes again means when you have a neuron fire or a group of neurons fire.
The appropriate motor pool for the muscles that we'd like to activate. We then stimulate, activate those lower motor neurons, which causes the muscles to contract and movement to occur. Now, of course, movement without sensation is actually kind of difficult. Just think about what it would be like to try to move your limbs if they're numb. But we can also get sensory information as well. So the sensory consequences of your movement can be recorded in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord in the form of spikes. For example, here, a feather touching the hand. These spikes can in turn be decoded in real time, sent to patterns of stimulation to either the same N1 device in the brain or perhaps a different one in a sensory area. Stimulation of that part of the brain would cause percepts of touch and proprioception, closing the loop.
So just showing the reverse of that. And as I mentioned earlier, that's been done with prosthetics, where you can feel through a synthetic robotic prosthetic, but I haven't seen it done from biological tissue. So that's really interesting and quite
We
extraordinary.
have a lot of work to do to achieve this full vision, but I hope you can see how the pieces are all there to achieve this. And if you find this prospect as exciting to you as it is to me, I hope you'll consider joining us here at Neuralink. Thank you.
That was done quite well. I think that, oh, there's Elon Musk. He came back.
All right, let's see what he's got. It really is
We're
good
all
to see that they
implanted.
brought, yeah, they're being
Why does he
controlled
look
by
like
the
he
Neuralink
wants
right
to?
now.
It looks like he wants to deck somebody. What was up with that? Did you see that? He's like.
Try to
Thank
watch
you.
your audio,
This
guys,
is obviously
because I'm
amazing
trying to
and
boost
has
it
clear
so that people can
therapeutic
hear.
potential. It would also be great for the scientific neuroscience community to access some of these tools. Do you have any plans to make these available to neuroscientists?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, no, I want a real answer here. Let's see.
I think there's probably a lot that can be figured out if we provide the surgical robot and devices to neuroscience research departments at universities and hospitals. So I think at the point at which we have, we need to be in production with the machines and obviously have the FDA approvals, but I think it would make a lot of sense to provide this to research universities and hospitals.
Yeah, no kidding. I think Elon's done a good job with this so far, but let's play a game of who is uncomfortable by what he's saying. I'm interested in that.
The question is, how, of the data that we...
Of the data sets that you've collected, are there any that you plan to open source for the scientific community?
Yeah, I think that would be fine. I think, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Because I think it could be really interesting for people working in AI research to build upon that and build foundation models for the brain.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, I actually got no problem with just publishing it on our website. You can use it if you want.
Looking forward.
I love watching just like the business plan changing in real time as we're watching it right now. And I mean, that's huge, but they've been so like tight-lipped to this point. That would be amazing if they would put their data out. Please do that.
So I have one question. So as we know, for implantable
seems quite
electrode, either
likable
for stimulation or
in this
recording,
mode.
after we implant the electrode, the scar tissue will grow around the electrode, and especially for recording, the signal we get will become smaller and smaller after long-term implant. How do you solve this issue?
For context, I'm Zach. I lead the microfabrication team on brain interfaces. I don't think we can solve it specifically, but one advantage we have is both the flexibility and the small size of our threads. to try to limit that scar tissue and that damage. And some future work that we have started working on, that we'll continue working on, is pushing the size of the threads down, just to try to limit the immune response and really limit that scar tissue growth.
Actually, I want to follow up. So, do you think it will be helpful to actually load some drug on the surface of your electrode, or some other way?
Well, I think like maybe the question is like what sort of signal degradation have we seen over time, and you know, basically does it work a year later? Does it work 2 years later? It does. So, yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm not sure that was the question, but
in terms of thread longevity specifically, really the gold standard that we can use to assess is the data we have from our animal participants. And so for that, I'm not sure if it was mentioned before, but the longest data we have right now is for an animal participant who has went 600 days with useful functioning channels where we were doing something useful with the signals for BCI. And then with the newest version of our device, we have sort of a collection of participants who are at or near 1 year of data and completely useful functioning BCI from that as well.
Thank you. If I may add one more thing. So you mentioned potentially having drugs to kind of reduce inflammation. So one of the things that we are actually actively working on is having some sort of biological coating to either reduce inflammation or make them slippery. So, you know, you mentioned, you heard from the presentation that one of the challenges that we have is removing the threads from these neomembrane tissue that are formed after implantation. So there are programs like that where we're really looking at kind of incorporating some of the learnings from biology and these coatings into our threads so that we can hopefully reduce inflammation as well as make it easier to extract.
I'll be interested to see if they come up with a new coating. So usually there's something called Paraline C that's used on like the Utah arrays that helps try to decrease that immune response. But let's see what Elon's
minuscule. So it's like a very tiny electrode the body basically ignores.
Yeah, so the damage with any really tiny electrode is quite minimal. So Elon was just saying that there's not a lot of damage because this is small, and that's true. But it's really more that the area right around the electrode gets scar tissue, and so it's not really damaging the brain so much as it is making that signal harder to pick up from that. And so to date, the longest implant that I know of in humans is in Nathan Copeland. It's a Utah array, a little over 8 years. But Neuralink identified early on that one of the things they want to work on is have interfaces that last a lifetime or longer than that. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see what that data looks like over time. But good to hear that over a couple of years they have good signal quality. I'd like to see if there was any drop-off.
It could be, for example, that you're actually picking up a different neuron day-to-day, and that's why you get the change in firing rate. We don't think this is at least the majority cause of the situation here. The reason is that if you look at sort of the spike shapes day-to-day, even when the average firing rate is shifting a lot, you still see sort of stable spike shapes. That's obviously not a fully bulletproof story, but at least gives some confidence that it's not actually different neurons you're picking up. However, there still is very much a chance that that could be the case in at least some part of the robustness non-stationarity story. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, to be clear, that like this electrode position is actually fairly stable, because you've got these very tiny, basically very tiny wires with there's some play in like you've got the device attached to the skull originally, but then you've got this long, so tiny wire with kind of a coiled section. So it's it does tend to basically stay in the same place.
We also asked for questions on Neuralink's Twitter.
Yeah, I think very quickly, they're going to Twitter questions right now. But that is a really important piece, because sometimes if you have an implant fall out of its location, that can become quite problematic. And you know, in terms of signal quality and then potential safety issues. So it does seem like if this is working the way that they say, with that give, that will probably be quite helpful.
Very early detection.
So since they're getting into Twitter questions now, do we want to sort of maybe wrap the stream and sort of give our thoughts and
you probably
and do a closer?
That,
yeah, let's see if anybody has questions in the
very early
chat.
The very beginnings of a stroke. because you can see sort of like electrical signals starting to go sort of haywire. So there's actually probably a lot of just general health monitoring that you could do once you're in there, you know, and with very simple sensors.
Hi. You guys all did a great job of distilling a lot of complex engineering and science and making it wonderfully clear. So, great job. I wanted to ask a little bit about the stimulation, I guess, for the phosphenes and for the evoked movement. How are you thinking? Is this more like local stimulation? Is it juxtacellular? Are you steering current around? How many cells are you activating? How much current are you using? I'm just curious what the scale of this is and whether you have a lot of precision or a lot of, you have pretty profound behavioral effects too.
Do we have any questions coming in, Colin?
Oh yeah, I'm Dan.
No.
And
I think
how
a lot
many
of people
cells
jumped
you
off
stimulate
when,
with a
the stream
single
started.
electrode is dependent on the impedance of the electrode, size of the conductive pad, how much current you deliver.
The essence identity, I don't know what question they asked, but they seem...
It's the pineal gland one.
Oh, okay.
Customize the shape of a phosphate.
No problem.
Or the shape
Thanks for sticking around.
Don't end live.
We think with our current electrodes, at least in code, back of the envelope calculation would be something like about a 50 to 100 micron diameter sphere of cells.
We'll let one more question go. I'm going to cut this, and we can kind of do our thoughts
system,
on
the smaller that
this
sphere,
event
the
overall.
smaller and more
then
specific
we'll call it.
you can make a particular phosphene. Basically, the
We all
smaller the
worked
pixel
full
in the image you can
work
produce.
days today,
So
so
there's plenty of scope for customization of that.
Actually, also it's possible to get to a much higher, like
we're approaching midnight here too on the East
by
Coast.
controlling the
How are they going to scale
the
up
field,
from
electric field
phosphenes to
between
qualia?
the electrodes.
I'm not exactly
So,
sure how they're going to do
it's
that,
not
but
it's not a one-to-one
hey,
relationship. You
there was
could,
a start,
actually,
and they have many machines, it seems. So I imagine that it's going to be a matter of resolution, just like pretty much everything in neurotechnology. Resolution, how processing happens, how inputs happen, how outputs happen.
brick by brick, right? They're building it slowly but surely.
Neuron by neuron, channel by channel, sometimes YouTube channel by channel.
Yeah, I do wonder with that. So we saw this a little bit with the when they were showing the receptive fields, so those little red and blue colored dots that we saw, and what you might have noticed from that is that those dots look somewhat random, and it's not like a computer screen where it's just like this nice, really easy flat projection of what you're seeing into the brain. There's a lot more complexity in terms of how, like, where this information is coming from, and there's also processing done ahead of that because the brain is also kind of choosing what information it wants to see, which is really weird. But like based on what our expectations are, that information is being changed as it comes in. So like there are all of these little complexities that are really hard to work with that become components of this. And it's why if you saw that image that they were showing, that these circles are not all brushed up against each other, but they're individual circles. And my guess is that they're going to be looking for receptive fields, which by the way are not all like the same size or there's so much complexity within this, but I imagine that they're going to be targeting a spread as much as they can to try to put together a cohesive image. But you're still not going to have like colors or anything anytime soon, just because of these are very, very difficult things. Their colors like move in this wheel. It's like I won't get into that, but there's just a lot of complexity. So it'll be a while before we see that. But I will say that based on my understanding of what research is out there right now, like this seems to at the very least be comparable in terms of what they're talking about right now. Which again, putting this in the frame of reference of Neuralink started in 2016, I think that everything that we saw is quite impressive. It's impressive in any lens. A lot of it has been done before. A lot of it is done in humans. But I think again, seeing seeing them do it in such a fast time frame is really impressive. And then also at the same time, I think that the attention to production and what this actually looks like going into people is something that I'm really glad to see personally. I think that it's an interesting time to be doing that, because if you have an issue in a clinical trial and you have to change something like that, it's a big ship to turn if you've already invested all of this money in there. And also when you have to make changes, for the most part, any significant change, you have to resubmit to various regulatory entities based on those changes. Like, it's a pretty slow process. And so it's just very interesting for me to see at this point already them building the infrastructure and making this bet that I don't feel that they have to yet, making this bet that this technology will work. So they must have a pretty high degree of confidence in that. And so that to me is interesting. Yeah.
Just to cut you off, I real quick, can we mute the audio on the live stream with more long form chat stuff, just because it's really confusing to hear two audio streams at once? You know
I thought it was off. I thought
no, it's still.
It's. Oh,
okay,
so
there we go.
so me.
No, we're good now.
Me playing with that slider constantly for the last hour, I guess, was doing nothing. So that's awesome. I was having fun. So
okay,
great.
I think it's good now. Hold on, let me.
Okay.
Yeah, it was off. My bad. Keep going. Sorry.
All right. Well, it's it's on us right now, which I'm sure is what everyone wants to see, which is why our viewership is dropping off. So, but anyway, that was something that was surprising to me, and isn't something that I would have thought is necessary. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's not a step that I would have expected. Just that, like, the attention to production, and then also you noticed throughout there that they really are coming hard, not directly, but coming hard against the accusations that have been laid on them earlier, in terms of they're talking about the pig is voluntarily going into the box while its leg is controlled by a brain computer interface. It's freely moving. It chooses to plop its head in a thing and charge itself and stuff, just like my Roomba. And it's it's good to see that emphasis. And still, like, I don't know what happened at UC Davis. Like, I'm not excusing that, but I'm also not pointing a finger at that. But I will say that they seem to have responded to public opinion on that and are making a concerted effort to address that, which I think is really important and very welcome.
I think that some of the higher ups within the company, notably the Elon Musk, has in the past been very optimistic about where this would be by now, and I think that as time has gone on and the reality of building these devices has sort of set in, it's been sort of sobering for everybody involved to sort of have to come back to reality and talk about, like, for example, he had said in 6 months it'll be in human trials when Elon Musk first came out onto the stage or whatever. And then when the engineer came on, like immediately after, he said, well, hopefully in 6 months we'll be ready. So I noticed that as well. So I think that.
Right. And they also said, like, Elon Musk came out and said, and I'm sure that he just misspoke, like, the tone was a lot better in this, but Elon Musk said it will be in humans in 6 months. And that was a big red flag, because it's like, I haven't seen them submit for clinical trials. But then the engineer, like you said hopefully we'll be submitting for a clinical trial in 6 months, which that sounds reasonable, given what we've seen. But again, you're right, like, there was a promise of it being in humans in 2020, and we're going into 2023 now. And that's not a criticism. I think that it's good to be taking time. It's just, it's important to remember that in, what we're hearing from Neuralink, in that, wanting to be reasonable with these timelines is important. And I will say that the tone felt within this a lot more down to earth and with reality, but also at the same time, like, still projecting pretty ambitious views for the future, which I think that the balance was very good. I also like that the team got to speak, like the experts on the team got to talk about this and talk about why they're excited about the research, and I think those are the people that need to be lifted up. So that was good to see.
Yeah, I totally agree on the amount of people that they had out in the like from the team and stuff, from the development team that they had out on stage talking to us directly. I think that that's a huge step in the right direction for these sorts of things moving forward. How cool was it to see the monkeys recharge their implants by themselves, basically voluntarily going to a little tree area and just like plugging their head in? I thought that was so sick.
Cool.
And voluntarily, it's great.
Yeah, I just
Yeah,
thought that was one of the coolest parts.
That was it was very smart too. Just the way that they did that whole thing, integrating into the, I mean, yeah, because that was something that I was like just interested in. Is like, okay, are they like sticking in a box and putting something on it? And that was very cute. Again, their showmanship is good. It was that was cool. And then I forget who said it, but someone in our group mentioned that could be something used during sleep, right? Like it's in your pillow, or you like plug in, and like it's still giving me Matrix vibes. Like it's a little weird, but also like that is very cool and very, very usable in terms of real world applications. So that's
I mean, the question is, are they going to do it right? And if it's done right, it could be seamless and perfect. If it's not done right, you know, we don't want to talk about worst case scenarios or whatever, but it's all a matter of taking your time with the technology and taking the time to develop it. And I think that I honestly don't think they're off time-wise right now. Like I think they're where they should be for the amount of time that they've been in the industry. So it's good to see that they're sort of taking a step back and just bringing everything back to reality and moving forward in the right direction.
I think it's also useful not just for the company itself, but for the field of neurotechnology and how it's perceived, because people in research and development in clinical neurotechnology have to be extremely trained in order to even do things like market neurotechnology. And so there's this whole matter of ethics and compliance and rigor that we have to go through in order to even be able to work with patients, for instance. And this sense of care, well, it doesn't degrade the credentials. Rather, it puts these people who are doing this work on the stage, which is great.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's why it's important to hear from all of these voices.
What did you guys think about the needle discussion? I know there was quite a bit of talk about fabrication and about different pieces of this implant device that they've created, right? I thought that the deep dive into how, you know, such as a small part of this giant, you know, implant device, how much they had to, you know, hammer away at that. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think
it goes to show.
Go ahead, Shrina. I don't have much to say. I was just going to speak.
Yeah, we're all kind of fading a little bit.
Yeah, I think that it goes to show, well, the ingenuity of this and the matter of thought, attention to detail, and the stuff that is showing that this is not just a hacked together thing,
right,
but it's something that really does require a huge amount of mechanical engineering, biomedical engineering, and that these are real problems that people have solved.
Yeah.
Rather than just hype.
Yeah, so like if you're making a hacker project on a weekend of like, oh, I want to build like a smart doorbell from scratch or something, right? Like going online and ordering a webcam and ordering, you know, a sensor to detect if somebody's in front of us, like doing all that or whatever, because it's such a low risk thing, that's totally fine. But when you're working with the brain and when you're working with such a delicate organ that literally houses your consciousness, you want to really be as thorough in your fabrication of these of the implanting devices and stuff as possible. And it's really good to see that they've taken the time to really think about every single thing that can go wrong, and they're designing essentially from scratch with some, you know, I'm sure some influence from other papers and that sort of thing. This device that, you know, hopefully is foolproof. I guess we'll see with time.
Yeah, and it really is, from what I've seen, a novel strategy to be implanting electrodes. And I think that that's important to emphasize, which is why there's so much ambiguity around it as well, and why, you know, like I think all of us really want to see a paper to come out to like actually know what type of data quality we're getting. But I mean, this is a really new approach, and from what we're seeing here, it seems to be working quite well. And I think that conceptually, just thinking about these threads and the reasons why they've made them as a way to reduce scarring by giving it some slack and all that, conceptually it seems pretty fantastic. So yeah, so we'll see. I saw someone tweeted online a Neuralink event bingo card, which is kind of funny. So we've got an impossible claim. I think we had one of those in the beginning about downloading information. Demo doesn't work as expected. I think they cleared that one.
They learned from last time.
They recorded videos. Yeah, they recorded videos. Groundbreaking. That's the word. Yep, they definitely said that. Motor cortex absolutely doesn't start on time in the middle, which we benefited from. And novel claim that isn't novel. A little bit.
Yeah, quite a few actually. With when they were talking about the handwriting thing from the other paper. I forget.
The Howard Hughes one, but at least they gave credit to that. But yeah, and again, you know, this is a completely novel device, so it makes sense that they're kind of redoing those things to prove that this is capable.
And it's a stepping stone, right? Like brick by brick, like I was saying earlier. Like they're building on things that have already been built, and that's what you should do when you're building new technologies.
Yeah, definitely. I also want to say, so actually before I get to my next point, on the surgical robot, Mike, are you going under? You getting a surgery from that thing?
I would trust it.
Yeah.
I was about to say, like, from a layman's perspective, like they did a great job of like building a trust just like in that alone, like how in depth they went, and I was just like, okay. Doesn't seem like they're just like
he's ready for his Dr. Octopus implant.
Yeah. Exactly. There wasn't a lot of broad brushing. It was just like, here's what we're doing behind the curtain.
Was there anything that scared you about what they were doing, Mike, in particular? Like, was there a moment where you're like, that's scary, or not really? Do you feel like it was well explained?
The point you brought, did they touch about the impact, like
They did not. I haven't seen that talked about like anywhere, which is why I'm interested in that. So how a Utah array is implanted is there's an air piston that pushes it in like in one go, and they they'll adjust it so that it goes to the right depth, but you have this impact, right? And so I'm wondering, and I don't know if that creates any, this is not something I've looked into, so I don't know if that creates any issues, but I'm just curious about the repeated because that could be problematic. I also think you brought up the heat point, right?
Yeah.
So we're having a battery, assuming it's a lithium ion battery under the skull. I mean, that's a little concerning to me. I mean, I'm sure that they're aware of these problems, right? But I'd like to see some safety.
Well, God forbid we have another Samsung situation, right, where the batteries are exploding and that's in your skull, right? Like that's not great.
I will say that with the location, I expect, so you have cerebral spinal fluid that's moving around. I do expect that to have some heat dissipation, but probably not sustained. So I guess it depends on the intervals of stimulation and use. So that's interesting.
Interesting ethical question too. What if these devices, like theoretically, the goal for these devices are to be, the ultimate multimedia device, theoretically, right? You could sense and smell and whole new form of filmmaking even, right? Like theoretically, like you can put yourself literally in the shoes of a person. If that becomes so addictive and so so engaging to use, but there's some risks associated with using the device for too long. Like maybe it starts to overheat an area of your brain or whatever. Building these devices so that they don't have any immediate danger to the surrounding brain tissue or whatever, like we saying with overheating and stuff, especially if they are that addicted, and if they are something like a smartphone. I mean, people sit on their smartphones literally all day. In some cases, they'll just sit there and swipe or whatever, and like go through apps and stuff. I guess what I'm getting at is like, I would hate to see somebody that's like addicted in an analogous way to that sort of device, when it could have a negative impact on their brain health. Directly have a negative impact on their brain health rather than indirectly.
Yeah. That's
I
interesting.
think that in terms of overheating, that's probably not going to be tolerated by the medical device community.
Yeah.
If that were a
We
thing.
can only
So
hope.
Yeah. I mean, if you were a doctor, then would you prescribe someone an implant if it was known to have an overheating problem even 1% of the time?
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing. Like, I'm confident with you that it would get weeded out at that stage. I'm just wondering where they are right now. Like what does that present as? And again, of course, I mean, they have very talented engineers, so I'm sure this is something they're thinking about. It's just, that is interesting, especially with the processing that's done on board, that it stimulates. Like, I'm just interested in seeing what that ends up presenting as, I guess.
I mean, we've talked about the ethical questions of brain-computer interfaces so much in other videos, so I'm not going to get too much more into this, but somebody in the chat mentioned like hacking and stuff as well. I don't think that that's not a risk, if that makes sense. I think that there's definitely potential. Any amount of technological thing has the potential to be abused. But I'm hopeful that that's not the case, and like Sharina was saying, like hopefully the FDA and hopefully these regulatory agencies that we have are properly making sure that doesn't happen. I would just hate to see that come to fruition. Real quick, they mentioned that the next generation of neural implants from Neuralink will have 16,000 electrodes in it.
Yeah.
Wow, what a jump, huh?
That I mean, it's incredible. And yeah, I was shocked to hear that. I wonder if it's all to one module, if it's to multiple modules, and this was something I was thinking as we were going through as well. So they're talking about whole brain recording, and I think by that they mean whole cortex, like topical cortex, so the surface of your brain, which is most of where you'd want to be, working with for brain-computer interfaces anyway. But how many of these modules do you need? Because you probably don't want a thread that's going from here all the way over to here or to here, whatever. And so how much of your skull becomes these little coins? It's interesting with this approach that they've gone with. I wonder if that ends up becoming a limiting factor. But yes, I mean, I'll believe it when I see it, but if they are making a 16,000, I mean, yeah, that's maybe that's the impossible claim on the bingo card. I mean, it's not impossible, but oversold claim, but that is that would be amazing if true. But to the audience members' question, why don't we get it in the hands of researchers first with that 1024 model, and then we can start continuing to build. But I'm glad that they're making continued innovations. It's awesome.
Interesting question here too. This may be for Sharina. What about risks for intracranial pressure from the incision? Is that something that they address? I don't know if I missed that or.
Oh, intracranial pressure. I think that they would minimize that by practically floating the electrode array almost as much as possible, so that any point of that, even if that thing was pushed, it's not going to create some sort of thing. It would probably be more like a manhole cover almost, where even if things were to slightly move, let's say if the monkey went like this really hard, then it's probably not. It's probably going to be made so that it is as anchored as possible in place.
Yeah.
And we've done these kinds of things with mice with dental cement in terms of keeping implants in place as well. So I wouldn't be concerned about intracranial pressure. I'm mostly intrigued by the amount of channels and the use cases for them. So for example, if a person has lost some sort of function due to a traumatic brain injury, such that a whole part of their brain is not there anymore, then could there be additional channels there to help interpret some additional information just because there's a bunch of extra space? So what do you do with it?
Huh.
Interesting.
That's fascinating as well, and I wonder how this equation changes with traumatic brain injury as well, in terms of getting and how these devices, like if you have a traumatic brain injury after training on one of these devices, what that retraining procedure looks like or something. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe a remap.
I'm getting tired. Yeah.
And it's likely going to be an individualized thing because every traumatic brain injury is going to be different from every other.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, I want to give you guys an opportunity to bring up anything from the whole live stream that we just watched before I get into my last point. Anything you guys want to specifically make note of or talk about that you thought was cool?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how they did the typing thing. And I thought that was a very, very clever way of presenting that information in a way that I think was showy in a good way, but still proved like showed that there is merit to the technology. So yeah, that was a very, very clever way of doing that. And the cursor speed was very, very good for the rate that monkey could move the cursor around. And it seemed like they have had a lot of emphasis on the processing of how to sharpen that to make it more accurate. And if you watch people use more traditional brain implants, you'll see that there's a little bit of shake in that cursor movement. And I don't, again, we need to see the paper, but that was pretty impressive to see how accurate those movements became with whatever processing that they were doing. And then, just a general point, like they were doing this in freely moving animals. And that's interesting too, because, pretty much all inhuman BCI studies that we have are people that have some level of paralysis, that are in a wheelchair. So we have less, movement that might cause artifacts or dislodging of an electrode. So the fact that they claim that they're still getting good connectivity, whatever that means, after 2 years, and that the monkey is free moving and that they're able to collect good data while free moving is a good sign as well. I think that was the last thing I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, I thought the pig simulation was so incredible. Seeing their ability to, I mean, obviously we've seen this in other studies before, so it's not really that unique, but the way in which they seem to be doing it is very intriguing to me. I'm really interested to see how that translates to in human studies later. Maybe repairing people's spinal cords, that have been in accidents and that sort of thing. I think that this technology has a huge opportunity to do a lot of good, and I'm really hoping that that's what this is primarily used for.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to take a step back and look at where this industry is and how quickly it has evolved, and Neuralink is owed credit for that, both in terms of what they've been doing, but also just there's been a lot of eyes and investment that's been brought into the space in recent years. But the research pace has been really quickening before then, and just like kind of came together, like Neuralink came in at a good time. But just the fact that we are at this point now where we are very seriously talking about and seeing a future where someone who has a spinal cord injury may be able to walk and move and feel, where someone who has ALS and can't speak is able to. I mean, like, we are on the cusp of that right now, and it's kind of crazy. At the Society for Neuroscience conference that Sharina and I were both at a couple weeks ago, I noticed that the biggest theme in the brain-computer interface papers were speech decoding, like direct word from thought decoding for people that can't speak.
Super cool.
and like I knew that there was some of that research being done, but I was shocked to the level of development that's been done in that space. And it's just, I think that seeing this event and then, has caused me to step back and just kind of look at the overall development, especially because we're seeing it in a commercial lens. Like, this company is really gearing up to turn this into a commercial device, and I think that that's very notable.
One thing that I've continued to note in this field of neurotechnology is that whereas a lot of senses, they are at the forefront of development, the sense that seems to be underdeveloped and understudied for the amount of impact that it can have is the vestibular system or the balance system. And this is because a lot of people have balance problems, which leads them to falls and things like that. And if there could be use cases in brain-computer interface that did solve these kinds of balance problems, then it can possibly prevent brain injuries and various other things like spinal cord injuries before they even happen.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, I think
cool.
that's a good.
Yeah, I think
did you have something you wanted to say, Colin, or are you good?
No, that was my last.
That was okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other closing thoughts, guys? Anything else you want to bring up before we end the stream here? Thank you, everybody, by the way, in the chat so much, and thank you,
so
you
much
guys
engagement.
also.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much, Sharina, for joining us. We appreciate your insight, and I know we're late into the stream at this point, but please, if you're still on here, go check out Steal This Brain Idea. We will be making a shorter recap of this, and we'll definitely be shouting you out because your channel deserves some love, needs some love. I know you just started it, and it's a tremendous resource. And of course, thank you to Mike as well, who has just become an incredibly valuable member of the team, and makes our videos what they are. And so I appreciate having like your perspective that's like more of a layman's perspective to neurotechnology, but also having like some insight from the videos. I like having you on these things as well, and making sure that people know that you're a part of the team. And then yes, of course, thank you to everyone. Oh my gosh, the chat has been just
crazy,
popping up. I haven't been able to like look at it so much. I'm gonna go through and read this, but I'm just scrolling right now, and it's like seemingly endless. So, and there are many names in here. I've seen a lot of Heart Song, I think Bird Dog earlier, Essence Identity, so many people with like just tremendous engagement. So thank you very much. We appreciate all of you, and feel free to message us on social media, or in the comments here, wherever, if you have more questions, if you have video ideas. Like, we are really passionate about science communication for neurotechnology and making this information more accessible. So if you ever have a topic you're interested in, hit us up at BCI Guys, pretty much wherever.